Yeah, that's not
Do you think
great.
the marketing person didn't know what they were doing,
I think that's not brilliant. That's not brilliant.
It's not the best, is it?
It's not, and I mean, you've got to remember that won't just be one person that will have gone through. Many people who
meetings
signed off on that
people
one.
sitting around a desk going, yeah, we've looked at 10 different versions. That's the one we're going for.
We're definitely
with the aeroplane flying into a tower.
Flying into the tower.
In the middle of a busy city. What could people think when they see that, I wonder? No, that's the one they went
Crazy
with.
that
Apparently the leader in Pakistan, the Prime Minister, is not happy. Peter Cardwell is on the other side of the news at 4 o'clock. The news coming next here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Thursday evening. There's a lot to discuss. It's been a really big news day. The first thing I think we should discuss is the screeching U-turn by the Labour government. This is about grooming gangs. They are going to do an inquiry. It's not an inquiry, it's a rapid national audit, which is 3 months. They'll look into all the different aspects of how grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, let's call them what they are being dealt with by the state. It will be done by Baroness Louise Casey. You might say she's busy enough already with the Social Care Commission and a number of other projects, but that's what's happening. Also, Oldham finally gets its inquiry. We will talk to a councillor in Oldham about that who's been calling for it for some time. So the government has done a U-turn on that. It's listened. I think it's listened to people who have been contributing to this station, viewers and listeners who've been saying, let's just get this sorted, let's look into this properly and save those young girls. We'll also talk about the ceasefire agreed between Israel and Hamas, although could it be falling apart already? We'll get the views of our international editor, Isabel Oakeshott. Pressure is building on Keir Starmer over a payout for Jerry Adams as well, but he was definitely not in the IRA, and I, for one, completely believe him. on that one, I say with my tongue firmly in my cheek. We'll talk about the mass drill rapper promoted by the BBC. Yes, your and my licence fee money is being paid for this thug, a murderer, to put his music on BBC One Extra. He's talking drill. If you haven't come across it before, you're very lucky. It basically talks about killing people in horrible ways. Yes, that's what passes for entertainment on the BBC, and your licence fee and my licence fee is paying for that. We'll talk about BP cutting almost 8,000 jobs as net zero pressure mounts, the sport as well, of course, and the Scottish Conservative councillor who has defected to Reform UK. They are building up in Scotland, and actually, if polls are to be believed, they may well get the same number of members of the Scottish Parliament as the Conservatives after the Scottish election to Holyrood. We'll get the latest on all of that. I want your views too, of course. This is my show, but it's your show too. Let me know your thoughts. Jodie's on the phone today. If you've never done it before, you give her a ring, you make your point, and we get as many people as possible on the air between now and 7. The number 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember, the main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss. Let's get started here on Talk. Well, within the last hour, we've heard from Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, talking in the House of Commons. As you will be aware, for really all of this year, the 16 days of this year, the Labour government has been under a lot of pressure in regard to the scandal of rape and paedophile gangs, these groups mostly of Pakistani Muslim men who are raping and worse, to exploiting, doing all sorts of horrendous things that we can't talk about at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to young girls. This has gone on for many, many years. Elon Musk amplified the calls from Oldham councillors to try to get an inquiry. We'll be talking to an Oldham councillor a little bit later on who's been at the heart of this. But let's just hear what Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has been telling the House of Commons this afternoon.
I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford Inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
That was Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, talking about what is going to happen. Essentially, a rapid national audit, that sounds very much to me like an inquiry, into these gangs, plus new local inquiries. We spoke to Tom Crowther actually a couple of weeks ago on this programme, and he was a really, really interesting interview. He did the Telford inquiry. He's now going to do the Oldham inquiry, which the Oldham councillors have been asking for. We'll replay a little bit of that interview a bit later on. Probably one of the most interesting interviews I've ever done in the 4 years I've been on this station. Let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott now. She is Talk's international editor. Isabel, this is a massive U-turn from the government. I don't really care about the politics. I'm just delighted they've come to their senses. What do you think?
Well, I think that they were always going to have to offer something on a plate because there's so much political pressure, and that's why they've come up with what, frankly, I think is a bit of a dog's breakfast. I don't want to be disparaging about it because I suppose they're doing something. And also, by the way, I don't think anyone wanted a national inquiry of the type of national inquiries, public inquiries that we've had in other areas that have taken years and years and years and years. That wouldn't have been any good at all. But the idea that Baroness Louise Casey can, within a period of 3 months, produce anything really worthwhile, looking at such a vast subject, I think is absolutely for the birds. You know, I immerse myself in new subjects to write books, and I can tell you, you can't get an awful lot done in 3 months, you know, in terms of research, and then writing it all in a period of 3 months on a subject such as this, spanning however many years, decades it's been going on. this is going to be very, very superficial. And in terms of the local inquiries, I'm sure that people in the so-called pilot scheme areas will be pleased about that. But to me, what's actually missing is the national dimension. The reason that all of this has kind of exploded into the public consciousness recently, when in fact it's been going on in a kind of drip way for very, very many years, is because there's never been an effort to bring it all together, to actually draw out the key themes from what has happened in different parts of the country, very much like the post office scandal, actually, where, you know, we were all peripherally aware that there were a number of postmasters in different places that were having some kind of difficulty, but no one actually drew it all together for a very long time. So to me, the solution that they've come up with is a real dog's breakfast, actually.
It's also, I suppose, the repetitive nature of it, because sometimes those local inquiries, as I heard from Tom Crowther previously, can actually get under the skin of these things properly, talk to people in a less confrontational way. But I absolutely take your point, in the sense that there will be links. There will be children who have been trafficked, for example, from one area to another. There'll be links between specific areas and gangs who, I mean, this is essentially the sex version of the rape version of county lines, child abuse side of county lines. And if you can't join the dots in all of this, and also you don't have a national inquiry which has powers under the Inquiries Act to call people, to get persons, papers and records, well, some people might say, what's the point, essentially, Isabel?
Well, I know, and I actually kind of agree with that. It feels that the point, as far as the government is concerned, is to take the heat out of this, you know, to stop, in particular, Reform UK from launching their own inquiry, which is the last thing that any of the other parties would want to happen. So I think the point of this is actually, unfortunately, politics, and that's no good to victims, not just victims past, but those who are still being caught up and dragged into this horrible behavior, because all the anecdotal evidence, if not more than anecdotal, is that some of these practices are still going on quite a large scale in many parts of our country. So I say, I don't want to just be negative and say it's all hopeless and all pointless, but I would have liked to have seen something a bit longer than 3 months from Louise Casey. A year might have felt a bit more sensible, really. She's very experienced at this type of thing, but sometimes doesn't it feel like, you know, it's not one size fits all. Other investigators are available.
Yeah, well, indeed. And also she's got a lot to do in the Social Care Commission as well. And surely she should be, you know, she only has time to focus on one thing. Speaking of people who have some focus, lost their focus, needing to gain a focus depending on your perspective, in her first keynote speech of 2025, and really properly as Conservative leader, essentially, Kemi Badenoch has set out what her leadership will actually look like. She's been leader of the Conservative Party for, what, 10, 12 weeks, something like that. Let's just see what she has been saying this afternoon about her leadership.
It may not feel like it right now, but our country's best days are ahead of us. Britain is a land of opportunity, not a country to apologise for. So if you want real plans rather than announcements, join us. And if you want a better country for our children, join us. Together, we can fix the damage that Labour is inflicting. Together, we can make politics work again for the first time in a generation. The Conservative Party is changing. We are under new leadership. We are back in the service of the British people, and we are going to give you your country back.
Kemi Badenoch also talked about immigration. She had some pretty strong words on that.
And no ifs, no buts. We simply cannot take all the millions of people who want to come here from elsewhere. Our country is our home. It is not a hotel. If people arriving don't want to integrate into British culture, they shouldn't be here.
Well, Isabel, are you inspired?
So I listened to the whole thing, and the thing that really grated on me was that she said the Conservative Party is under new leadership. Oh, I think about 10 times. And it's very clear that their focus groups, the Conservative Party's focus groups, have said that she's got to keep saying this. But it actually becomes incredibly irritating if you just say it on a loop again and again within a space of a short time in one speech. So I was a bit fed up of hearing that. Secondly, the fundamental problem she's got is that when she says we are going to give you your country back, the entire nation, were they to be bored enough to be listening to her speech, would be thinking, but guys, you're the one that took it away in the first place. You know, you've spent 14 years taking away everything, or so much of what we hold dear. And so much of what she took aim at in the speech, she even admitted herself happened as a result of decisions that her own party took. So it's really, really difficult for Kemi Badenoch at this point to get a serious hearing. I think she is a serious person. She speaks very clearly, and so many of the things that she said will resonate with a lot of our listeners and viewers. You know, the idea that a shrinking number of people are working ever harder to pay for an ever-growing number of people who can't be bothered to work or, decide that they've got better things to do. I think lots of people will resonate with that. The idea that our country is not a hotel, I thought that was quite powerful. But at the end of the day, the Tories are the reason we are where we are, and sure, Labour is making it even worse, but they're not going to be forgiven that quickly.
Isabel, thank you. This is Isabel Oakeshott there, our international editor. Peter is giving me a ring from London. 0344 499 1000 is the number he has rung, and you can too. Peter, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. Yeah, I've watched the last hour of what Cooper has had to say.
Yes.
Time and time again, MPs have said we need accountability, and to do that, we need a full national inquiry, and she failed to do it. And what she did was she brought up the Hillsborough law, which she said was no one was held accountable, Peter.
And that's the point. With a lot of these inquiries, I mean, I don't have great expertise in the Hillsborough inquiry, it must be said. I have covered it a little bit as a journalist. But the point is, Peter, that it's not just diagnosing the problem. We basically know what the problem is. It's saying, how can it be fixed and how can people be held accountable? I mean, do you have any faith that a 3-month national audit, not inquiry, but audit, and these local inquiries can really properly solve this problem?
No, not at all, because she's got social work care to do as well.
Well, that's it. Louise Casey is a busy bee. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Lorraine has been in touch and says, let's not get too excited here. I've yet to be convinced that those who aided and abetted these monsters, including the police, social services, politicians, and all those who ignored these young white victims, will be found accountable. Smoke and mirrors comes to mind, and I'm sorry to put a dampener on this, but this is superficial, and those such as the Judicial Service will get away with the cover-up. Thank you, Lorraine, for that. Suze has been in touch on the drill rapper. This is the murderer who is being promoted by BBC One Extra, which is a music channel. You may not be familiar with it, but it is a well-funded, licence fee payer-funded radio station. The drill rap guy. Do the BBC think he's a role model for young men, says Suze? Why else would they promote him? So the lesson to young boys is that murdering someone can have positive consequences. Go to prison for a few years, come out and glorify your criminality and be rewarded with fame and money. I'm just going to read you some of the lyrics that the BBC has thought that your licence fee payers' money should fund being played on the BBC. This is a drill rapper. This is a thug called Jake Farry. He's now 35, who's released from a life sentence for the 2008 murder of Jimmy Mizzen in South London. Now, Jimmy Mizzen's family are a wonderful, very dignified group of people. Two people who have a foundation. They are incredible people who have been campaigning for many years. I know a bit about them because my former boss, James Brokenshire, was someone who knew them, was someone who campaigned for them, and indeed someone who raised money for them as well. Margaret and Barry have dedicated their lives to celebrating Jimmy's life. They've shared their stories of forgiveness, peace, and the hope to effect change in communities. The charity aims to support young people across the UK by challenging them to be change makers and peacemakers in their local communities. But this thug, Jake Farry, who was recently released from a life sentence for killing the 16-year-old Jimmy Mizzen in South London, he's often seen as in a balaclava. He raps on one song. I promise you, these are the lyrics that are being played on BBC One Extra, which is a which is a music station for young people. He says things in his music. Stuck it on a man and watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's. Sharpen up my blade, I've got to keep those necessary. Stay alert and kept it ready, any corner could be deadly. Judge took a look at me before the trial even started, he already knows he's going to throw the book at me. See a man's soul fly from his eyes and his breath gone. It defies belief. It defies belief that the BBC is putting this poison on the air. And this person just openly flaunting the fact that he's a murderer. It is absolutely disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. It flies in the face of justice. The BBC should issue an apology immediately and sack whoever decided to put this absolute scumbag on the air. His music should never be heard on the radio, never mind a licence fee payer funded. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the programme. We're also going to talk about what's happening in Israel. Yoram Confino is standing by, the Israel correspondent for The Telegraph. We'll also speak to the former Middle East Minister, Alistair Burt. Could it all be falling apart before the ceasefire even comes into place? Stay with us here on Talk.
Suspended Labour MP Mike Amesbury. He has appeared at Chester Magistrates Court and basically he has pleaded guilty to assault by beating after punching the man in the street. That means there will be a by-election in the Runcorn and Helsby constituency. Now, he has a majority of 14,700. Reform UK came second at the election with 7,600. We know that's one of their target seats, so it could be a very interesting first test of how well Reform really are doing if they could take that seat.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is talking at the moment about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Let's just dip into what he is saying there in Washington, the US Secretary of State, essentially their foreign secretary.
As we look to relief for the people of Gaza, I'm also thinking of all those U.S. citizens who are held wrongfully, who are hostage in countries around the world.
Do you know about
I carried with me.
Miller says he doesn't know about the Hannibal directive. You can leave, sir. About the Hannibal directive.
Again, I'm happy to address questions in a few more minutes. I look forward to answering questions in a few more minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Lots of speeches.
Thank you.
Let him answer some questions.
I look forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Instead of making another speech every day.
Sir, would you like to be escorted out?
Go ahead.
You don't have the responsibility to tell me where to go. Do you want to be escorted out or not?
Thank you. I look forward to answering questions in a minute. Thank you.
I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask a question in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller has explicitly told me he will not answer my questions. I'm justified.
So this is clearly a bit of a contretemps between the journalist there and the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He's trying to say things on the Middle East. Let's hear him.
In my pocket, the names of those who had been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally, I just wanted to share this morning.
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me.
It sounds as if a journalist is perhaps, we can't see it, all we can see is Anthony Blinken, but it sounds as if a journalist may be being removed from that briefing from the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. We only heard a little bit from the US Secretary of State there. Blinken, you'll miss it. But it is a very, very serious topic. And of course, we know that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is talking about the fact that this could already be falling apart. Let's get an update from Yoram Confino. He is the Israel correspondent of The Telegraph. He has been a stalwart and a brilliant correspondent over the last 18 months of this hell that the hostages have been through. Could we be seeing some of them back even as early as Sunday, Yotam, or are there problems and fissures in this already? Because it's not even 24 hours old and there seem to be many problems for Benjamin Netanyahu and for the ceasefire already. Just bring us up to date.
Well, the Middle East is always full of surprises and drama, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. I don't think that this deal will fall through, mainly because Netanyahu cannot afford it. He would be condemned not just by the international community, the United Nations, all Middle Eastern countries, but more importantly, by Donald Trump. So I think this is really just a matter of hours before they finalize these details. My understanding is that the holdup here is a discussion about which Palestinian prisoners will be released from Israeli jails. Hamas apparently wants to have some very serious members with a lot of blood on their hands released, and Israel has apparently gotten a veto right over this, but this is what they're discussing. Everything else really has been agreed on. So if this falls through because of some members of Hamas that aren't released from Israeli jails, that would be simply astonishing.
What is the mood in Israel? Are people excited, cautiously optimistic, worried that it'll fall apart? What sense have you got of this from people's reactions?
All of that and more. If we start with the families of the hostages, they're super anxious, super worried. Some of them are crying because they're happy, but at the same time, they're also extremely worried about whether their loved ones are actually even alive because they don't know. So this is some sort of a sick game that Hamas is playing where it'll be like winning the lottery if you get your daughter or your sister or whatever it is out of Gaza. So you have that category of people. Then you actually have other people who are quite upset with this deal. They say that this is a surrender to Hamas, and that's not just people on the streets who are demonstrating. It's also people in Netanyahu's coalition. Two of his parties actually have threatened with leaving the government if he goes through with this deal, because they say, we haven't defeated Hamas, and you're basically giving them 6 weeks to breathe in the first phase of the ceasefire, and you still have hostages who aren't even going to be released in that phase. In other words, Hamas could pull a trick on you, and they could end up reneging on the deal, and then you'll have a second set of hostages who will be left to die in Gaza.
And that is a real worry as well. What is Netanyahu's political position at the moment here? Because certainly, if this deal were done, if the war were to end, if there were this to play out, surely that would mean the time would come for an election in Israel.
Under normal circumstances, yes, you're absolutely right, Peter, but Israel is not a normal country, so I don't think it will necessarily lead to elections. Netanyahu, on paper, still has a majority. Even if those two parties leave him, he will still have a majority. It's not a stable coalition, but he could easily continue for months until it all unravels. But you're right, we're not that far from an election, but it's not as if it will automatically be triggered after the ceasefire.
Yotam, thank you. That's Yotam Confino there, correspondent in Israel. He's also the author of a great book on Netanyahu's Israel Rise of the Far Right, which I highly recommend. The US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken still giving that press conference in Washington, D.C. about the ceasefire. He's been constantly interrupted with some journalists who have been saying he and the US government should be in The Hague. That's obviously the International Criminal Court, which is there. And from what we heard earlier, I don't know whether it actually happened or not, but certainly it seems that some journalists have been asked to leave. Let's go back to that press conference now, just briefly, and see what is happening there, if we can.
That would move toward that way. She was working with international partners. Names have changed, but countries pretty much the same. Egypt, the Europeans, the Gulf Arab states. And so 16 years ago, we were in the same situation that we're in now, particularly because the ceasefire, current one,
It's a journalist asking a very long question there, clearly the Robert Peston of the Washington Press Corps asking Anthony Blinken a question there. We will of course bring you the latest on what's happened there, but it appears to be one journalist anyway at least who has been removed for suggesting that Anthony Blinken should be in The Hague, as those remarks reported. We'll bring you the latest on that when we hear more about it, of course. Let's take a listen to what Joe Biden, the current president, yes, for another few days, said last night on the ceasefire.
After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration.
That is the US President for the next 4 days, Joe Biden, talking about this deal. Let's get a perspective from the former Foreign Office Minister, Alistair Burt, who had responsibility for the Middle East from the UK perspective. Alistair, thank you for joining us. Is this going to work?
That's the big question, Peter. I mean, people don't know. It ought to. The region has been through extraordinary misery. The plight of the hostage families, which your correspondent has just alluded to, the destruction in Gaza, and the fact that on October the 7th last year, everyone said this can never happen again. We can't, it'll never be October the 6th again. We must make sure that this finally is dealt with as an issue and that we don't go back to where we are now. Well, it's been 467 days. We've seen the massive destruction. No one has won. Israel hasn't won, Hamas hasn't won, the people have lost. So there is every reason why it should hold and then get on with the other issues that must be resolved in order to make sure it doesn't happen again.
The Prime Minister last night in a statement called for a two-state solution. That has been the policy of the Labour Party for a long time. Do you think this can be the basis of this, or is this simply about ending the war? Because there's getting peace, and then there's working out what the longer-term peace looks like. I just wonder, given the instability, particularly with Hamas, which has been really taken apart to some degree anyway by the Israelis, its structures, its leaders, and so on, but also the precarious nature of Netanyahu's position. I just wonder whether you're hopeful that not just the peace can come on Sunday and beyond, but also that a longer-term solution can be found, especially when there's such a lack of trust.
Well, you're very perceptive in that ending the conflict is not peace. Peace will only come when the basic issues are resolved. Two-state, well, two-state has taken a boost in recent times because of Saudi Arabia's position. Saudi Arabia holds the key to this. It's clear that Trump sees his future in the region as delivering normalization pacts in the same way that the Abraham Accords brought in the Emiratis and the Bahrainis with Israel. He sees that Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Netanyahu sees Saudi Arabia as the key to Israel's engagement in the region and acceptance by everyone else. But Saudi Arabia has moved because of the circumstances of Gaza and made it clear that there's no normalization now, as had been on the table before, unless there is a Palestinian state. I expect that to be the bottom line for the future. There has to be a Palestinian state. There then has to be the guarantees that Israel will need for its security. It must never face what it faced on October the 7th again. And this will require a lot of internal work in Israel from ministers who are dead set against that. And of course, you then have future issues, the West Bank, potential annexation there, and the issues of Jerusalem. So all those need to be brought into discussion now to get a stable peace. Both the United States and Saudi Arabia are absolutely key to this.
Tell me a little bit more about Saudi Arabia, especially in the context of a Trump presidency. How muscular do you think they will be on this? How much do they want it to work to their advantage and to get the aims that they want?
Saudi Arabia wants to deal with Israel as well. Saudi Arabia is going through an extraordinary process of change in that the advent of the current crown prince, known as MBS, is changing the nature of Saudi Arabia. The old idea of Saudi Arabia as a place where women have to sort of walk in the background and all that, that's gone. He's very popular with young people. The economy is changing. We see it in relation to sporting events and commerce and the like. But the truth is, the economy of Saudi Arabia is key to the rest of the region. Israel sees this as well, and Israel's economy is very energetic. But unless the issue of the Palestinian issue is resolved, it was sidelined and marginalized in the Abraham Accords. That's why the Abraham Accords did not succeed in delivering peace to the region. This can't happen again. It won't happen again. But Saudi Arabia, if it's able to bring Israel into the economy of the region, it has a vested interest in doing so. It's seen its great rival, Iran, much weakened by what has happened, but equally, it's reached out diplomatically to Iran. The states in the region don't want a war with Iran, which would cripple everyone.
And Iran probably doesn't want that war either because of its situation. Very, very interesting to talk to you, Alistair. I'm sorry we just got to leave it there, but hopefully a longer conversation the next time. That's Alistair Burt there, the former Middle East Minister. Very, very interesting situation that's happening there, and we'll continue to cover that over the next few days. Also here at home, lots of people getting in touch with the BBC and the fact that they have allowed horrendous lyrics to be broadcast as part of drill music, and this murderer who is openly flaunting the fact that he stabbed a 16-year-old, completely innocent 16-year-old, to death. Cliff in Berkshire's been in touch and said the BBC allowing such lyrics to be broadcast is unbelievable. When I think back to songs they banned in the 1950s and 60s, it doesn't make any sense. My only worry is that the publicity this artist is receiving will boost his sales. We're going to talk about that next with someone who is the mother of Joshua Ribera. He was murdered, stabbed in the heart near a nightclub in Birmingham. She knows all about being a victim, being in a family of someone who's been through this. It'll be fascinating to get her reaction in just a few minutes here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, just an update on that press conference that Anthony Blinken is giving at the moment. We can maybe see what's happening there if you're watching on the screen. This is Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, talking about the ceasefire in the Middle East. And a second journalist has been thrown out of the Anthony Blinken press conference. He's talking about the ceasefire, saying he's been shouting at Anthony Blinken, trying to get an answer to the question, are you compromised by Israel? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? Well, as you know, genocide factually is wrong. That is a factually incorrect use of the word genocide, because that is not what has happened in Gaza. In fact, the population of Gaza has actually increased since the time of the 7th of October terrorist attacks by Hamas, so that is factually wrong. But nonetheless, this is a word that so many people, usually pro-Palestinian people, throw around with abandon, even though it is factually wrong. And why do they do so? Well, we know why. Because it's a reference, of course, to the real genocide, to the fact that there have been genocides like Srebrenica, for example, in Rwanda, and of course the greatest genocide of them all, the Holocaust. And what they want is Israel and America to be compared to the Nazis. That's what they're doing, and they're gaslighting, or perhaps not even as subtly as gaslighting, Jewish people the world over. That's exactly what's at play there. Right then, let's talk about something that is happening on the BBC. This is the front page of The Sun as well. There's a masked drill rapper promoted by the BBC who's boasting about murdering the schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen. Now, Jimmy Mizzen was murdered in South London. He was a sort of gentle giant. His parents, lovely people, really brilliant campaigners, and we hope to speak to them tomorrow, Margaret and Barry. They've been dedicated their lives to celebrating Jimmy's life, sharing their stories of forgiveness, peace and hope to effect change in communities. And certainly their example could have been followed by this scumbag, by Jake Farry, who is 35. He's been recently released from a life sentence for the 2008 murder of Jimmy in South London. Now, what has he done? Has he reformed his life? Has he said, right, I'm going to pick up a trade, I'm going to do an honest day's job for an honest day's work, I'm going to reform my ways? No. What he has done is become a drill star. This is a form of rap music that glorifies violence, it glorifies knife crime. Some of the lyrics, absolutely disgusting. See a man's soul fly from his eyes and his breath gone. Sharpen up my blade, I've got to keep those necessary. Stay alert and kept it ready, any corner could be deadly. Stuck it on a man and watched him melt like Ben and Jerry's. I mean, first of all, this person should still be in prison. Secondly, he shouldn't be a music artist at all. He has free speech, of course he does, because he's now free. In my view, he shouldn't be. Thirdly, he is becoming a music artist, and he is being promoted by the BBC, by a radio station called 1Extra, and he is being essentially, I mean, on air. Listen to some of the things that the DJ said. And Jimmy Mizzen's family have responded to this. Also, the BBC says, decisions on music are made on a case-by-case basis. We have strict editorial guidelines in place before any contact is broadcast or posted. BBC 1Extra does not glamorise violence. Could have fooled me. Could have fooled me there by what you've done, BBC. His tracks have been pushed on BBC 1Extra, with the DJ Theo Johnson dubbing him an up-and-coming star. The DJ Theo Johnson said, "You see 10, yeah," his name's 10, his drill name is 10. "He delivers the bars in a certain way that makes him really stand out to me. I'm really liking what I'm hearing when I'm hearing what he's laying down at the moment." So him talking about killing people, and indeed talking about killing Jimmy Mizzen, is liked, is a good thing, according to this DJ. Unbelievable. Let's talk to Alison Cope. She is an anti-violence campaigner. Alison, thank you for speaking to me today. And I know that your son Joshua Ribera was murdered in 2013. When you see what the BBC when you see what the BBC is doing here, what do you think?
If I'm perfectly honest, it's not just the BBC. I think for a long time now, we've allowed a lot of platforms to promote this level of negativity. So what's happened is some very shocking lyrics, some very shocking content has now become mainstream, acceptable all over platforms across the world. You know, for a long time, a lot of this negativity has been played. So it doesn't come as a shock to me. I know we're focusing on one video and one artist, but if you look on some of these platforms, there are many videos very similar, many artists that are very similar. So it doesn't come as a shock. It should never, ever have been allowed to get to this point. We've got very recent cases where these platforms have played a role in young people's murders. So, you know, is it the young people's fault? Is it the music artist? Is it the radio stations? Or is it those platforms that have allowed it to become the norm? And I think that's a huge issue.
I know that Joshua's killer is still behind bars, and rightly so. I just wonder what you hope for him when he is eventually released. I mean, what I'm not saying we obviously don't know what he would do with his life, but were he or someone like him to do something like this, that would compound the hurt, I would imagine, for you and your family.
Oh, absolutely. I've had conversations very recently. If you have a look at a lot of podcasts, a lot of channels are interviewing people that have come out of prison that have committed murder, because we know that will gain a lot of interest, which will then lead to monetary gain, because views equal money. So, you know, there is a chance that this is a headline I could be facing myself in a few years, and just the thought of it makes me feel sick. So for families that are living with this now, it's horrendous, because it just brings up so many emotions and so much pain. But it's become a big trend at the moment.
And it glamorises it, doesn't it? It glamorises violence.
Yeah, it does. But it is lots of platforms. We've allowed many of these multi-million-pound platforms to promote this level of violence. So many young people believe it is acceptable, where of course it never is. It's not okay to promote violence. It's not okay to glamorise it. But whose fault is it? The people that are allowing these platforms to make so much money, and the consequence, sadly, in some cases, is death. That if that platform was allowed to talk about a paedophile sexually assaulting a child, would that be allowed? No chance. But because it's young people, then we've allowed it to happen. Look at what's being streamed, the programs. You know, I'm trying not to mention the platforms, but I
think we know what you're referring to. I think
name one that doesn't glorify violence, that isn't allowing this to happen. Every single platform that young people see, and if you have 30 million views and it's being allowed, it's very difficult then to say to a young person that is not acceptable, because surely it is acceptable. And this is the mess that we're in at the moment.
And tell us, I know you do a lot of campaigning. I know you've worked with police forces, Crime Stoppers, you've worked with universities as well. What is your message to people, maybe, let's face it, probably not the young people who are listening to drill music. I don't think there's probably much of a crossover between people who listen to that music and watch this programme. But if their parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, whoever, are watching or listening to this programme, what's your message to them? What would you say to them about this if they say, oh yeah, there's this great new drill star that I'm listening to, and the parents go, oh right, okay, what's drill? And they just say, oh, it's just a form of rap music. What would you say to them?
I mean, for me, many young people listen to all kinds of music. The difference is what messages are stronger towards that young person. So if a young person has been brought up knowing fully well that this is just what we view as entertainment, and that's not probably the right word, they would never dream of replicating that. They would never dream of speaking like that. But it's become a fine line between what's seen as normal and what's seen as, you know, shocking. So for me, it's about trying to break down the perception of social media, the perception of these channels, and how somebody else might view you. If you're talking about stabbing, drugs, shootings, violence, there's a very high risk chance that somebody out there might assume that's what you're involved in. And so there's that fine, dangerous line between entertainment and real life. 20 years ago, entertainment was entertainment. Nowadays, we know influencers, music, films, it's become very blurred. And I think we need to strengthen that line between right and wrong. And that's a very hard thing to do, but it's essential. So that's the main message that I give to young people. This is the perception of social media. This could be the consequence, and the ultimate consequence is your life could be lost.
Alison, just before you go, I want you to tell us about Joshua. What sort of person was he?
Joshua was a music artist, which I don't know if you knew that, or many people did. He did grime music, which potentially can be seen as negative, but he had myself and others basically explaining the difference between right and wrong. And I think that's a key message that I want all parents to share with their children, you know, what we're seeing online versus what it's like in real life. And Josh, you know, he was a lovely young man. And of course, I'm going to say that, had his own challenges, but he had a strong force behind him, which was me, guiding him in the right direction, teaching him the right morals, manners, respect. And eventually, through that darkness, he turned a corner and became very successful. And I'm just really proud of his entire story, good, bad, all of it, because that inspires young people, to realise they can turn it around if they're making mistakes, but nothing's going to stop them being a respectful and successful member of society if that's what they choose. And that was the choice that my son made.
And it is a choice, and it is a choice that people listening to drill music need to make as well. Alison, thank you. I really appreciate you talking to me today. That's Alison Cope, who's an anti-violence campaigner, and she's the mother of Joshua Ribera. He was murdered in 2013. He was stabbed in the heart near a nightclub in Birmingham. Thank you to Jason in Worthing, who says, Peter, the BBC is basically promoting the murderer drill song artist and is basically glorifying stabbings and murder. It's absolutely disgusting and disgraceful. This man should not be profiting from the murder of an innocent person, and the BBC producers should hold their heads in shame, says Jason in Worthing. I want to know who's being sacked over this. I want to know which BBC producer who made a decision, or DJ, to put this on air, are they being sacked? Has their contract been terminated? What's happened there? What's the BBC telling us? We have strict editorial guidelines in place before any content is broadcast or posted. BBC One Extra does not glamorise violence. Really? I think that's factually wrong. And BBC, I think you know that's factually wrong. So how about telling us what really happened, and also what the consequences have been for the person who decided to put the scumbags music on the licence fee payer paid for airwaves? Why don't you tell us that? In a moment, we'll talk about patients dying in hospital corridors. This is the crisis in the NHS. It's not going away anytime soon. Roy Lilly will join us in a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
The truth is that the economy is smaller than it was 3 months previously, back in August 24, and smaller than it was back in May 24. So it is gently heading south on an overall basis. But when, of course, you apply it to us as individuals, all your viewers and listeners, then per person, we're getting a lot poorer than that. We are in a per person recession. I have no doubt whatsoever.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's talk about the NHS, because patients are dying in corridors, pregnant women are miscarrying in side rooms, overwhelmed hospitals are struggling to cope. This is what nurses are saying, the Royal College of Nurses, talking about evidence given by 5,000 of its members across the UK. It showed cupboards, car parks, bathrooms and nursing stations being turned into makeshift areas for patients. It was just on Sunday that it was revealed that a job ad has gone out for nurses to be specifically assigned to corridors. Roy Lilly is with us. He's a former NHS Trust chairman. Roy, why is the NHS running out of space so much? This crisis can't continue.
No, it can't, and it's just chock-a-block. There are more people ill and sick than they've got beds for. So, you know, when the wards are full, they start using the corridors. Why are the wards full? Well, it's very, very difficult to get frail people, mainly, that's who's in the wards at the moment, who've come in with respiratory problems. They're medically well enough to go home, but not physically fit enough to look after themselves. The NHS has a duty of care, a legal duty of care. It can't discharge people unless they know that it's safe. And in many cases, it isn't. There's about 13,000 people in hospital now who don't need to be there, and they're trying to get home. But social services, who are responsible for finding the care packages for these patients, mainly domiciliary care packages, it's the people that come in the morning and get people up and look after them during the day. They just don't, they either don't have the capacity or don't have the money to pay for it. So, I mean, the whole system's grinding to a halt. And of course, at the other end, because social care and community care is very poor, really, there are a lot of people at home who could do with some help and some support who no longer get it. So it's both ends. So as a result of that, in the middle is a chock-a-block hospital, and we've seen what's in the RCN report today. It's a 463-page report, and it's horrendous. I mean, I read it through this morning.
Some of the detail, Roy, is just horrendous. People having cardiac arrests in corridors or cubicles which are blocked by patients on trolleys, denying life-saving CPR. People dying on trolleys and in chairs and waiting rooms. One nurse saying the NHS was no better than the developing world. Women miscarrying in side rooms, which nurses said was not only distressing for patients, but made it difficult to monitor. An incontinent frail patient with dementia having to be changed next to a vending machine in a corridor. Cases where 20 to 30 patients have been left in corridors under the care of one nurse and healthcare assistant. Elderly patients left to sit on chairs for days and spending hours in beds and corridors in soiled clothing. This is the NHS in 2025, Roy.
It is, and this it's interesting. This report has come out of a survey that the RCN did in December. The issue that they wanted to look at was the fact that beds, the number of people in hospital is counted by the number of people occupying a bed at midnight. The formula, the data capture, does not include people on trolleys in A&E.
Well, we're not getting the full picture.
No, we're not. And that's what they tried to do. They also said at the same time, by the way, fill this narrative thing in and tell us what it's like where you are. As a result of that, they've now got 5,000 nurses who've written to them with absolute horror stories. I mean, they've been taken by surprise, not only the volume of the report, but the strength of feeling and the horrible mess it's in. Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State for Health, made a statement in the House on the situation, and frankly, he didn't add very much. He said, there's not a lot I can do. We'll have to sort it out next year. But I mean, the whole situation is absolutely appalling, and there isn't a lot of wriggle room. I mean, if the hospital's a chock-a-block, that's fine. There are 54,000, I think, NHS staff today off sick with the flu. So there's huge pressure on staff. I don't think the vaccination program has been as enthusiastic as it has. The take-up has been lower this year, and I don't think there's been the public messaging that we know. And I haven't seen much public messaging telling people to get vaccinated and so on. I mean, perhaps I've missed it, but generally speaking, you can't move at this time of the year for
you're absolutely right.
Health prevention. So, I mean, this is a mess, and I hope. And I think there should be, and I would certainly call for some kind of an inquiry into them. I mean, when the dust settles, I mean, I'm not talking about, Royal Commission or anything like that, but certainly a senior retired somebody or other.
Well, surely NHS England must be aware of what's actually going on in its own hospitals, right?
Yes, it is. And, people often say to me, oh, well, it's the usual NHS. They get surprised that winter's coming. Actually, that's a trope, and it's not true. The winter plan for this year was planned from June, and I saw it, and I reviewed the. So they've been planning for a long time. I think they've been caught out by the poor vaccination response and the fact it's a combination of 4 things that I don't think anybody could have seen coming.
Right. Okay, we've got to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. That's Roy Lilly there, former NHS Trust Chairman. Let me know your thoughts on the NHS, maybe your experiences this winter or beforehand. 0344 499 1000. Just on the other side of the news, we're going to talk to Lewis Quigg. He's a Conservative councillor in Oldham about the fact that the Labour government has U-turned on this. There are going to be some inquiries and a national audit, they call it, into those grooming gangs. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell with you today and tomorrow between 4 and 7. In the next couple of hours there's lots to discuss, including Yvette Cooper's U-turn on grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them. There will be a form of inquiry. It's going to be a 3-month audit headed by Baroness Louise Casey. She's a sort of government troubleshooter and has been for many years. Former civil servant, now member of the House of Lords. She's going to look into it for 3 months. Then there are going to be local inquiries, including the Oldham inquiry inquiry that people were asking for. We'll talk to one of those councillors, Lewis Quigg from Oldham, who's been calling for that for some time. We will get the latest from him in a second. We'll also get the Labour angle on this politically as well from James Mathewson, a former spokesman for the party. There's lots to discuss as well on drill. Lots of people getting in touch about drill music. The fact that someone glorifying murder has been put on the BBC and being called an up-and-coming artist. That's what your licence fee is paying for. BP is cutting almost 8,000 jobs as net zero pressure mounts. We were told it wouldn't mean jobs would disappear. Well, that doesn't seem to be happening. Also got the sport update this hour, and we'll continue to talk about the Middle East as well, and a Scottish Conservative councillor who has defected to Reform UK. Plenty to get your teeth into. Tell us your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring and we'll talk to you on the air between now and 7, as many people as we can fit in. 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. Well, you'll remember at the very start of this year, I think it was New Year's Day actually, Elon Musk, in one of his many hundreds of tweets about the fact, or messages on X as the platform is now called, but nobody calls it, was talking about grooming gangs, about the failures he thought of the Labour government, his attacks on Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister. Well, her boss, Yvette Cooper, is the Home Secretary. Now, 16 days into this year, they have decided to U-turn. They are saying that a rapid national audit into these gangs will happen, plus local inquiries. A rapid national audit very much sounds like an inquiry to me, even if it is a short thing. This is what Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said in the House of Commons earlier this afternoon.
I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
Well, as you'll know, a lot of the media didn't talk about this. We have talked about this basically every day for the last 2 weeks. We've given you a voice, and if you've thoughts on this U-turn by Labour, will it work, will it not work, you let us know. 0344 499 1000. One of the many interviews I've done on this over the past sort of 2.5 weeks or so was with Tom Crowther, the person who the Home Secretary was mentioning there. He was in charge of the Telford inquiry. He's a KC, so King's Counsel, very senior barrister. He spoke to this show and to me about the gang scandal and specifically about his own inquiry in Telford. This is what he had to say.
Absolutely appalling that this is still going. When my inquiry reported in 2022, I said in interviews like this, never assume it can't happen here. Don't assume it's just the pariah towns. Every town should be looking at what's going on underneath the surface. And in Telford, we had 30, 40 years of children being abused. And fundamentally, the failing was those children not being listened to, those children being dismissed, discounted, disregarded as feral or making bad life choices. That was the real problem in Telford over decades.
That was Tom Crowther, KC, speaking to me a few days ago, and I found that a really fascinating interview. We're hoping to speak to him at some stage in the next day or two. Remember, I have shows on Saturdays between 10 and 1 both days. We're going to talk now to Lewis Quigg. He's a Conservative councillor in Oldham. And Lewis, I know you were part of the efforts to call for this local inquiry in Oldham. You must be happy that you've got it today, but there's so much to look into, isn't there?
I mean, I think it's on the face of it, yeah, Oldham's getting this inquiry and Tom Crowther's going to be involved in this, and that's great, Peter. But this is where the proof of the pudding is now in the eating, because it's 5 areas, one of which is Oldham, but that's £1 million for each of those areas.
That's not a lot. That's not a lot for an inquiry.
Telford, yeah, exactly. Telford costs up to nearly 10 million sterling, and you've got to look at it from this point of view. We had to try 6 times over 6 years to get a local inquiry. And as I've said previously on this, The Home Secretary today, I'm afraid, Peter, has missed the boat. She has missed an opportunity to right an incredible wrong by not giving these local inquiries the statutory teeth needed. By basically
and that's the point, isn't it? Because a statutory inquiry can compel people, can't it? They can say,
correct.
Look, if you don't do this, it's illegal. You've got to come and talk to us.
Yeah, and what I don't want to go over is the history of this, but a former councillor who's no longer with us, who's passed away, brought this up in 2013, Peter. 2013. It was grandma's. It was an ex-deputy leader of the council in 2019 who went to a dais at a council meeting and said, can we not investigate this? And was told it was barefaced lies, these allegations online. We then got told it didn't destroy their lives when the insurance review came out. An insurance review, Peter, which was an absolute whitewash, because out of sample of 10 cases, 11 cases, including one of the survivors who had to fight to get in there, as I said in my previous conversations with you, is that's a sample. So we didn't even know what the total figure was from that review that we had.
So how much confidence do you have in the inquiry today? Will it get to the bottom of this? You're saying it only has £1 million. It should have a higher budget. I mean, that's not a lot of public money.
My feeling, Peter, is that they should have been given the full statutory powers to investigate the council officials, the councillors, the police officers, the charity workers, all those people who allow girls to go through council corridors, be picked up outside police stations, be picked up at taxi ranks, being picked up in taxis, to be investigated and compel them. I go back to the assurance review, Peter, because it's a relevant piece of information. It's a factual piece of public information. There was police officers in that who didn't get interviewed. There was councillors in that who didn't get interviewed because they didn't have to get interviewed because it wasn't a statutory inquiry. They weren't compelled to come forward. Now, this is where the Home Secretary should have really put the feet to the fire of these local councils and police commissioners and all these other people who have in power. And I just feel, Peter, we've missed an opportunity. Yes, Oldham's finally going to get a local inquiry, but what are those terms of reference going to look like? Are we going to get people who refuse to turn up to these inquiries? These are all big ifs and big questions that really do need answering.
And I do want to put some of those to
point out with this, Peter.
Go ahead.
But it really does annoy me that 3 MPs that we have in Oldham, Jim McMahon, Debbie Abrams, and it was Angela H, now Lucy Powell, at no point in Parliament said to the previous government, Oldham needs a local inquiry or we need a national inquiry. Where were they? They can blame my party, they can blame the previous...
Well, they would probably say, look what Labour's done now. They've answered your call. They've said they're going to have an inquiry.
They haven't, Peter. They haven't done that. They have had to be kicking and... It's 15 days into January, thanks to Elon Musk putting... I don't know how many characters he put in that tweet, or X, whatever you want to call it, online, for them to suddenly take action. We've been fighting for nearly 6 years for this. 6 years. This six times it went before the council, 2022, twice in 22, so 3 times in 2022, Peter, once in 2023 and twice in 2024.
Okay.
And they all got rejected. That's 6 wasted years. 6 wasted years we've had of not being able to get an inquiry. If we'd had a full inquiry in 2019, 2020, obviously the pandemic hit in 21, we would have at least got to some answers by 2023, 2024. There was missed opportunity after missed opportunity to have a local inquiry. And I fear that we don't get to the bottom of what survivors want, which is real justice.
Yeah, Lewis.
And I'm sorry, Peter, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But the council leader issue a statement which said Oldham is now the target of the far right. We've had this in 2019. We had this claim in 2019. Not a single bit of evidence was ever put forward to suggest that. It was grandmothers who came to that conclusion, who fought for that, and survivors. And to put a statement out like that as a leader of this metropolitan borough was an absolute disgrace.
Okay. Lewis, I want to keep in touch with you. I want to keep talking to you as this goes on and as this starts up. And I want to make sure that we check in every now and again to see how things are going. And just please keep in touch with the producers because we're really interested in this and this is not going to go away. We want to see what happens with this inquiry and I appreciate your contribution today. That's Lewis Quigg there, who's a Conservative councillor in Oldham. James Mathewson is a former Labour spokesman. James, thank you for joining me this evening. Is this something that you welcome or will it be enough to actually have some hope anyway of solving this problem?
Good evening, Peter. Yeah,
good evening.
It's good. It's really good to see some action being taken on this. And I think it shows. I think it really does show because it's not easy for a government to, I mean, present it as a U-turn. Other people will present it as a U-turn.
It is a U-turn. It is a U-turn. They said we won't have an inquiry. Now they're saying we'll have an inquiry. That's a U-turn.
It is, but the term U-turn, I think, carries a lot of, shame and stigma with it. I think we should encourage governments to make more U-turns, in my opinion, because you should be able to say, okay, let's change our position on this.
And I agree with you, and I think they should be honest about it and say, do you know what? We made a mistake. We've listened to people. We've now. But
I don't think they have made
but they haven't done that. But it can be a sign of strength to U-turn.
Yeah, but I don't think they have made a mistake. I mean, they're so far...
They said there wasn't going to be an inquiry. Surely, if you're welcoming this inquiry, that was a mistake, James.
They're very newly into this government. They're picking up pieces from...
It's been 6 months. Why are they so rubbish at it?
And this is why they need to focus on, and I think this is what Labour does best, is giving power away locally. And those local inquiries on the ground are vitally important to that. That's what Labour does best when it comes to devolution, when it comes to a lot of its legacies, is about giving power away to regions and to local areas who ultimately know what's going on in those areas.
But I wonder if you have six... Okay, James, if you have 6 local inquiries, this is not just specific to Oldham, for example. There'll be lots of other places around Oldham. It's like county lines. It's not just about one specific area. It's about the whole country. It's about people being trafficked from one place to the other. And I just wonder if there's actually going to be a hate the word, but sort of holistic look at this, of saying what matches up, what is being done in different areas, rather than having 6 separate inquiries. I do wonder if a more joined up approach is something that would have worked better, because in 3 months Louise Casey already has another big job in the Social Care Commission, isn't going to get to the bottom of this in 90 days.
No, well, they will all feed into the Home Office. And the other thing that was mentioned as well is obviously data collection, and we're talking about that. And Yvette Cooper hasn't shied away from talking about ethnicity, which I think, I do understand people wanting to hear about that and to hear that data will be collected on that and that there won't be some kind of, sweeping under the carpet. But there's 2 things happening here at the same time, Peter, and we have to be honest about that. And Lewis, I understand his contributions he's making there, and it sounds like he's a very competent and good councillor on the ground in Oldham, and I'm sure his residents are very grateful for his contributions. However, his line about the far right is incorrect. There is a rhetoric and there is a message nationally going out to try and use this and to use victims and to use people who are rightfully calling for justice in a political sense. So the government has to be very careful about how it does that, and that it doesn't give power away, or it doesn't let people jump on the bandwagon or be involved in this who are using people who have suffered greatly over many, many years. And as for the party political line, I think we need to put party politics aside when we look at this, because it was a Conservative government. I mean, why weren't the Conservative Party of Conservative councillors?
And I've asked that question on many occasions, James. They had the J report. They had the J report. It was sitting on the Conservative government had the J report. It was sitting on a shelf, gathering dust for 18 months. They did absolutely nothing. Then Labour came into power. 6 months in, they have done absolutely nothing. They say they accept 18 out of the 20. The Conservatives accepted 18 out of the 20 recommendations. Labour are looking at that, and there's questions for Labour as well. You're getting...
Peter, this isn't absolutely nothing. What they've announced today isn't absolutely nothing. It's far more than was done in decades of Conservative government. So, there has been progress. But for people to say that that's the doing of Elon Musk, that's my biggest concern, because it isn't. There's been people who have been grafting away.
We would not be sitting here having... I agree with you, there are people grafting away, but it's a bit like the post office scandal. Or, Private Eye did stories on the post office scandal for years, for like over a decade. Nobody took a blind bit of notice of what they were doing and what Computer Weekly were doing. Brilliant journalism, but nothing really happened until the Mr. Bates drama on ITV. Elon Musk amplifying this. I know you're not a fan of Elon Musk, but we would not be sitting here having this discussion today. Yvette Cooper would not have announced what she's announced today without those tweets from Elon Musk. That is a fact, James.
But the motivations in doing it, we have to question.
Does that matter?
It does matter. It matters greatly, because why is a billionaire in America wanting to use this? He doesn't know. It was clear from the attacks on Jess Phillips that he hasn't got a clue about the details. He doesn't know. Why was
you have plenty of opinions on American politics, James, as do I. Isn't he entitled to his opinion as much as you are?
No, because I do my research, as do you, Peter, because, we're not Elon Musk, and we're not trigger happy, and we're not happy to feed conspiracy theories as Elon Musk is, because this is a man. Have you seen his Twitter feed? or his ex-feed, sorry, in recent days. It is absolute madness. The stuff that he is coming out with, he says that Keir Starmer should be detained. He claims that members of the Labour Party are paedophile cults. It's QAnon conspiracy theories left, right and centre. That's got to be tackled. But also, at the same time, that doesn't mean that we let people off the hook who have done wrong. And that's why I'm happy to see Yvette Cooper take on the challenge today and start that process. And it might not be everything everyone's hoped for. I understand that, but it's better than nothing right now, and hopefully more will come from it.
James, thank you. That's James Mathewson, former Labour spokesman. I've just been handed an article by Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary. He, of course, was campaigning to be leader of the Conservative Party, and he has written about Jimmy Mizzen. This is the young man who was murdered by Jake Farry, who is the drill music artist. I use the term loosely. And Robert Jenrick has written for The Sun. It's for the paper tomorrow. It's on their website now. Robert Jenrick says, I can't even begin to imagine the pain and suffering that Jimmy's death caused. I can think of few more sickening things than glorifying the death of an innocent young boy in songs to make money. This is our national broadcaster promoting the music from a murderer. What on earth are radio bosses thinking? They are glamorising violence to tens of thousands of impressionable young teenagers. We currently have a knife crime epidemic. They are helping to fuel it. He talks about the Capital being completely out of control. He says there should be a full investigation into such a poor editorial decision. Jimmy's poor family deserve an apology, and he says that Spotify and YouTube should follow suit as well. This is the story we're covering this afternoon about a drill rapper, a murderer who murdered a 16-year-old boy. The murderer is now out of prison, and he's been glamorised and given airtime by the BBC. What do the BBC say about this? Well, they say they don't glamorise violence. You're literally playing drill music. That's what drill music does. Don't you know? Don't you know what drill music is? Did you put that statement? Who decided to put that statement out? Which is factually wrong. Who's been sacked about this? Is there a disciplinary inquiry into this? Is there editorial oversight here? Is there further training that has been given to other people and one extra? I want to know the answers to those questions. And the BBC currently is not saying very much about it. We're going to talk in just a second about BP, because they're cutting almost 8,000 jobs as the net zero pressure mounts. We were told, of course, that this wouldn't lead to jobs disappearing. Unsurprisingly, that was wrong. We'll talk about Ed Miliband too. Stay with us here on Talk.
None of these people in their gated communities and their incredible incredible fees they get from being in films, they will never have to use a women's shelter. They will never have to use a rape crisis centre. And when rape crisis groups, for instance, have a man there saying he's a woman, that is incredibly significant.
But it's amazing, isn't it? How often you get, the great and the good. They're so concerned. They're so concerned about Me Too, but not so concerned about, an actress getting her bum slapped.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to John, who says the NHS is a failed socialist model. Thank you to John in Colchester, who said, don't forget the BBC banned Baby It's Cold Outside due to the lyrics and the implications of those lyrics, but still play a song by a convicted murderer. Apparently that's fine. John, very, very good point there. John in Peterhead, a different John, has been in touch. He says, hi Peter, great show. What a great idea it is to get local councils to investigate themselves to see if they've been complicit in ignoring child rape. It should be an outside source investigating with every rock kicked over. Well, John, these are independent inquiries, but the question is if they only have £1 million, I mean, that is not a lot. By the time you pay a KC, who will be on £1,000 a day if you're lucky, that will be eaten up very, very quickly. We'll talk about this. We'll get more calls on. We've had a lot to discuss, and we're definitely going to get some calls in just a second here on Talk. But I want to talk to Philip Ullman first, social business entrepreneur, about BP cutting 8,000 jobs as net zero pressure mounts. This is the company cutting many jobs across this 90,000 strong global workforce. 3,000 contractors will go as well. They're under growing pressure after the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband announced plans to wind down North Sea production and pour money into renewables. Philip, we were told jobs wouldn't disappear. In fact, jobs would be created by green energy. Is that still the case? Do you believe that?
No. I think, as we see with this announcement, jobs are going to go. It's central to my life. I was an engineer, and we had a factory in Watford. We actually produced real stuff, steel wire. That went to China because labour was cheaper in China. So the jobs of the UK population were exported to China. Now we've got the same thing happening, Peter, with energy. So we start to say net zero here, no net zero in China. Therefore, China has a competitive advantage. And therefore, China is going to be cheaper. And therefore, the jobs that need to remain here to look after people's lives and needs are moving again to China. So I think that this is an example of where we're getting it wrong. We have to look after our jobs. We need to look after our people. So I agree, this is not a good move.
It's interesting because the net result of this may be some more jobs, but also BP particularly, its workforce has grown dramatically in recent years from 65,000 to 9,000. Maybe they were perhaps going to lay people off anyway. Can this all be laid at the door of Ed Miliband and his net zero goals, really?
Yes, it's propaganda, Peter. I'll be honest. It's about trying to damage the UK economy again by forcing us to be uncompetitive, forcing jobs to go to countries that are not complying with the same rules, playing with a different rule set, and it's going to damage the UK economy. So this article that you've highlighted is an example of where we have to stop blindly following these ideas. No one really understands what net zero is. It's too complicated, and it's damaging the UK economy. We need to find meaningful employment. As you know, there are lots and lots of people that are not in meaningful employment. We suffered, the steel industry went and we lost jobs in Sheffield. The fishing industry went, we lost jobs in Grimsby. And the mining jobs went and we lost jobs in Newcastle and these other areas. And if we're not careful, we'll lose jobs again because of net zero. So this, for a Labour Party, which is supposed to be about protecting jobs, it's not protecting jobs.
Philip, thank you. That's Philip Ullman there. He's a social business entrepreneur. He was the chief energizer of the Cordon Group, the second largest recruitment and services firm, a huge company. So he knows of what he speaks. I want to speak to one of the many people who's been ringing in today. I want to get as many calls as I can on the air between now and 7 o'clock. I'm sorry we just haven't had nearly as many as I wanted on the air today. But let's remediate that by talking to Jules in Bedford. And Jules, you have been following the story, as have we, about this drill rapper who's been on the BBC. We're actually asking the BBC, we're asking them more questions now. We're saying, has there been a disciplinary process here? Has there a review? What about the person who decided to put this music on the air? Is their job in jeopardy? Have they been sacked yet? What's actually happening? Jules, what is your view there in Bedford? What do you think?
Well, I think the BBC's out of control on almost every front. Every single left-wing bandwagon it can jump on and amplify, that's exactly what it does. It hides behind cultural norms to promote or allow the promotion of extreme violence, of misogyny, rap songs.
Well, it says the BBC says BBC One Extra does not glamorise violence. That's what they say, Jules.
Yeah, well, if that were the case, they wouldn't be playing the sort of material they play. And
correct.
The reason they're banged to rights here, Peter, the reason that we finally got them is that there we have somebody who's actually a convicted murderer.
Yeah.
So this isn't somebody singing about something they might or might not have done or might not have seen. This is somebody singing about something that he has actually he himself done. And the thing is that one of the many sort of left-wing cultural talking points the BBC promote, of course, is Black Lives Matter. Do they really? What about the black boys knifing each other in the streets of our country, disproportionately represented by race, for whatever reason, and I'm not judging here, but those are the facts. 45% of people killed by knives in London have been young black boys, mostly by other young black boys. Do Black Lives Matter? Do their lives matter? Because if they do, they need to be not promoting this stuff on the airwaves.
You're absolutely, I agree with every single word that you've said, Jules. What is your message for whoever the clown was at the BBC who said this is an up-and-coming person and we should give him some airtime? In fact, I can tell you who that was, because it was the DJ involved with this who has commented on this. Theo Johnson is his name, and said, you see 10, yeah, he delivers the bars in a certain way that makes him really stand out to me. I'm really liking what I'm hearing when I'm hearing what he's laying down at the moment, and I know my producer Casey is a big fan as well, and she's been singing his praises and proper rocking with his tunes. And actually, just on that point that you mentioned earlier about knife crime, there's a story in the front of the Times today. In London, black people accounted for 49% of the 739 people fatally stabbed, despite representing just 13.5% of London's population.
Exactly,
of the 726 people sentenced for carrying knives, 45% of them were black. This is black on black violence, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, and it is something that we need to tackle and not ignore and not glamorise, Jules.
Exactly. So the two people you mentioned, the BBC promoting this character, this murdering scum, that they shouldn't have a job in a public service broadcast.
Agreed.
Quite simply. But the wider message, it's well overdue now. Defund the BBC.
OK, Jules, thanks for your thoughts there in Bedford. 0344 499 1000 is the number Jules spoke there. Philip is in Swansea. Philip, thanks for your call. What's your reaction to this?
I agree with everything that Jules was saying just then. Nice to speak to Peter. The thing the family should be doing now is getting in touch with solicitors, I feel, because if that was my son who was killed by that rapper, I'd be heartbroken, because they just opened up more wounds. Yeah. You know, they're trying to get over the death of this poor. You know, he's murdered the kid. The kid was 16. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now he's glorifying it. Right, so straight away they should get in touch with a solicitor. So that rapper, or whatever they call him, he shouldn't even get 1 penny of any sort of royalties or advertisements that pays him.
Well, he is using the fact that he is a murderer, that he murdered a totally innocent 16-year-old queuing in a shop, queuing at a cafe. He is using that for profit. He is profiting off that. He is laughing at you and me. He is laughing at the licence fee payer, because our money paid for that to be, he will get a royalty from that. He will get a royalty from that because it's been played on national radio.
Yeah, he's totally glamorising, right in front, basically rubbing the blood of that child in the family's faces.
That is what is happening. Philip,
right?
sorry, go ahead.
And not only that, right? they should sue then, or they should speak to the solicitor to sue the BBC for actually doing exactly the same by letting it actually be aired. And not only that, the DJ or the DJs that have played it, they should sue them as well, because that is.
It's a breach of their. It's certainly at the very least a breach of their editorial guidelines. Philip, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Interesting thought from John in Maidstone. John, this is a really, really good point. Thank you for it. John has sent it in on text 87222 with the word talk in his text. Peter, I wonder if the BBC would have played that song if it was one of Stephen Lawrence's killers that made a song after he came out of prison, says John in Maidstone. What a fantastic and excellent and very perceptive point. Thank you for that. Lots of others coming in on the NHS as well, but on this one, drill music is saturated with criminals, so the BBC will have to sack everyone who's played a drill song. Very happy if that happens, to be brutally honest. What an amazing woman and mother, sensible and articulate, and though she just lives with her sadness and makes the most of it. We heard from Alison earlier on, whose son was stabbed to death. Chris in Brighton says, the main man of grime music, Stormzy, performed at Glastonbury proudly dressed in a customised Union flag stab vest, for goodness sake. What sort of degeneracy are our kids worshipping? Stormzy also said a lot of incorrect things, factually incorrect things about Grenfell, although he's tried to support those families who've been through such hell there as well. Lots of others in touch. Gareth says, I do hope the probation officer of that scumbag so-called musician is thinking about recalling him to prison. Well, the Ministry of Justice has been contacted about this. Let me see if I can find what they have said on this. Just give me a second here. This is, of course, the One Extra music station. The Ministry of Justice is now investigating it. And they have said, I'm trying to see what they have said. They've certainly responded to this anyway, but this guy is called 10. 2 different songs have been played on separate occasions on the same DJ's programme. The songs have featured on the BBC Orbit website, which promotes new tracks and undiscovered artists hand-picked by BBC staff. And Robert Jenrick has written about this in The Sun today. There have been various people responding to it as well. I can't just find the Ministry of Justice response at the moment, but they are investigating it. I'd be very, very disappointed if that guy is not recalled to prison. Surely it is a breach of his parole. Robert Jenrick in The Sun tomorrow says, what on earth are radio bosses thinking? We'll continue to talk about that. We'll talk about gangs as well. We're going to talk to the Conservative MP for Keighley and Ilkley around the Bradford area on the gangs inquiry. I'll ask his reaction as well to this about Jimmy Mizzen as well. That's Robbie Moore MP. We'll talk to him in just a second here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you very much indeed to Les, who has been in touch on Twitter. He says, as regards the BBC One Extra station platforming a murderer, and that is exactly what they have done twice on at least 2 occasions. They are plain wrong. Sackings must occur, says Les. Have you ever read the scripts to rapper song scripts in general? They're really, really violent, full of shooting, sexual abuse. I never cared for rap even years ago. It sucks. Well, this is even worse. This is drill, which is a sort of subset of that. And Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, is in The Sun tomorrow. He says, I can think of few more sickening things than glorifying the death of an innocent young boy in songs to make money. This is our national broadcaster promoting this music from a murderer. Well, Robbie Moore is the MP for the Conservative Party for Keighley and Ilkley. Robbie, we'll talk about gangs in just a second, but just briefly, your reaction to this story that so many of our viewers and listeners are really concerned about. This is our national broadcaster, the BBC, playing songs about murder by a murderer, and licence fee payers are paying for it.
Well, this is just absolutely outrageous, and Robert Jenrick was quite right to use the robust language that you've referred to there. I know that there's going to be an article about this in The Sun tomorrow, but, you know, this is our national broadcaster who need to be held to account when they are playing music repeatedly, as it seems to have been, on their platform. And the comments that your viewers have made, I endorse a lot of them. I think that it is completely inappropriate, and the BBC need to be held to account on their actions that they've carried out in playing this music.
Robbie, thank you for that. I know that you have campaigned, and the main reason we have you on the programme is to talk about inquiries into these gangs, the grooming gangs, paedophile gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. I know you've campaigned for that for some time. Is this U-turn, and it is a U-turn, by Yvette Cooper, is that enough? Is that going to get to the bottom of that? Is that going to help solve the problem?
Let's be clear, this isn't really a U-turn from the Home Secretary. What we've seen, and I've just come from the House of Commons chamber, quite rightly, the Home Secretary has announced that the government will be implementing all of the 20 recommendations from the ICSA report that was carried out by Professor Alexis Jay. A very good move, something that I fully endorse. But that's where it really stops, because what the Home Secretary is not putting in place is a national inquiry that specifically looks at rape gangs.
Let's talk about that in just a second, Robbie, but the point you make about Professor Alexis Jay, on that report, your party said it only accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations, and it also, when the Conservatives were in government, sat on a shelf for 18 months with nothing happening.
Well, I have been talking about this issue since getting elected in 2019. It's something that many of my constituents have unfortunately had to endure this heinous crime for far too long. It's been going on for decades, which is why...
Did your party fail to resolve it?
But I've also called out the failure of the British state, regardless of political party, for not getting on top of this issue for far too long, whether that's been national government or indeed local government or indeed anyone with safeguarding responsibilities, which is why I was hoping that we would see the Home Secretary today do a U-turn and actually implement a national inquiry that specifically focuses on gang-related grooming that is taking place in far too many of our towns across the UK, indeed like Keighley and the Bradford district.
Why is a national inquiry needed? What's wrong with local inquiries? I spoke to Tom Crowther, KC, previously, who did the Telford inquiry. He's going to advise the government on this, on what to do, because the Telford inquiry was largely seen to have helped in some way. Should local inquiries and what was actually being called for by Oldham councillors, surely that is some way forward in this?
Yeah, absolutely, some way forward. But we want to have full robustness, full openness, full transparency across all of those towns. And you put yourself in my position, where we have a local authority who has consistently refused to have an inquiry into child sexual exploitation. Indeed, our West Yorkshire Mayor and her Deputy Mayor for Policing has said that this is not a Bradford problem, this is a national problem. So when you have a local authority that does not want to have that spotlight that shone across its area, and then the government is not willing to step in taking those tough decisions, their areas like Bradford will unfortunately not have that level of scrutiny, despite concerns being raised. And the second point being here is, yeah, I welcome the fact that the Home Secretary is talking about this. But what she has implemented today through a pilot scheme being looked at across 5 towns is not statutory binding. It does not compel witnesses to come forward and give evidence. Only £5 million has been allocated to this, which is nowhere near enough to provide the scrutiny that is needed. It will not lead to convictions. And indeed, that is where my concern lies, because in essence, unless you have the robustness of the state kicking in, you will not have the convictions that follow. And indeed, the trust that needs to be installed between those victims, survivors, and those families that have had to endure these crimes for far, far too long. And that trust back in the British state will not happen. And that's why I think that the Home Secretary's announcement today fell way, way short of any expectation that I, or indeed many of those victims, were expecting.
Robbie, what is happening today in Bradford? What is actually happening that you know about, that you've been told by constituents about, that needs to be investigated? Are we still in a situation where there are people in authority turning a blind eye to this?
Well, absolutely, and that absolutely, in my view, we have historic cases that are working their way through the system. We've seen some be convicted, which is very good news to hear. But there is historic cases that are working their way through the system that haven't got to the courts yet. There are live cases that are working their way through the system that West Yorkshire Police are dealing with. Other cases that have been explored elsewhere have referred to, unfortunately, young children being trafficked through the Bradford district. But yet, at a national level, there has been no spotlight that has been shone.
And that's my concern, Robbie, because you can have a local inquiry, but actually are the dots joined? Because this, to me, in regard to the rape of children, this is county lines all over again.
And that's exactly why I really, really do hope and plea to not only the Home Secretary, but the Prime Minister, indeed anybody that is in a position of responsibility, to just get behind the calls of openness and transparency and actually ensuring that proper justice is put in place for those victims, and that there is no cover-up or fear of cover-up in any of these gang-related or child sexual exploitation cases, which is why I do think that I welcome the recommendations from the ICSA report being put in place, but it just does not go far enough. And that is why I, and indeed others like Sarah Champion, the MP for Rotherham, have been advocating for that national focus, so that those dots can be joined and deal with those complexities that exist across towns and have haunted communities like mine in Keighley and the wider Bradford district for far too long.
Robbie, let's keep talking about this as an issue that's not going to go away. We will certainly monitor what happens very closely, hopefully with your help. Robbie Moore MP there, the Conservative for Keighley and Ilkley, which is of course very close, an area indeed of Bradford, wider Bradford area there, and he's a shadow farming minister as well. Stephen in Cambridgeshire has been in touch on this. Stephen has rung 0344 499 1000. Stephen, what's your perspective?
Well, it was just James Matheson commenting, why should Elon Musk comment on the affairs that are happening in the grooming gang?
I've never been to Afghanistan, but I have quite a few views on what goes on there.
Well, I mean, my point is, Elon's got several children. How many children has James got?
I don't know, but the point is that we're all entitled to our opinion. We're all entitled. I mean, we've got to be responsible with that. And some of the language and some of the things that Elon Musk was saying, I wouldn't support. But actually having an opinion on this and having an opinion on something that is happening in another country, whether you're fully informed or not informed, you have a right to do that, Stephen.
Yeah, of course you do. But as a parent, he's obviously got a vested interest in looking after,
Well, we all do. We all want our kids to be safe, and our I don't have kids, but I have a nephew. I want anybody of that age. I want all our children in society to be safe and treated properly. Stephen, I mean, should we be complaining about Elon Musk having an opinion on this?
No, because it's keeping it in the spotlight, and I mean, all I can see is the Labour Party and the left want to bury it. They just want to bury it and pass it off as if it's no insignificance. Well, I'm sorry, I've got grandchildren and children myself, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, thank you for your thoughts there. Stephen in Cambridge there. Jane has been in touch and says, inquiry, another inquiry, then what? They know what's happening, they know who. Kick them out. My blood is boiling. Put Isabel in charge. Gary says, sorry they've not come to their senses, as they've copped out. It should be a full-blown investigation into all aspects, including the councils, social services, police, local mosques, imams, no stone unturned. Another Jane says, afternoon Peter, genuine question, when is Keir Starmer going to fix the foundations of the UK? All he is doing is fixing the foundations of the world with our money. Well, he's in Ukraine at the moment, to which we give £3 billion a year, and will, in the opinion of the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, do so, as she put it, for as long as is necessary. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of that £3 billion can be used in better ways. Tony in Selby says, hi Peter, Maggie Oliver must be involved in this new inquiry. If she is not, I believe the cover-up will continue. How do we get her in that room? Jane says, Kemi Badenoch sounds like someone who's taken over a shop, saying under new management, selling the same goods. Nobody wants the goods. It will be getting new management later this year. Dawn in Chelmsford. I like Kemi Badenoch, but I think she is unfortunately associated with the failure of the Conservative government. She doesn't have the charisma of Nigel Farage. Hi Cardi P, says Neil. Have you noticed that when the leader of the Conservatives addresses the crowd, she refers to them as we? Contrast that with any speech by Reform UK, and every second word is Nigel Farage, and that's why Reform will never succeed. Reform is a one-man band, says Neil. Also, Jane says the only person who can be trusted to head the inquiry is Maggie Oliver. Stuart says, I'm sure we'll have been glued to the screen for Badenoch's inspiring speech this afternoon and have already been swayed to vote Tory in 29. Honestly, if that's the best she's got, then we could have saved time and incorporated her resignation speech into the same afternoon. Wow, Stuart not taking any prisoners there. Steve in Stoke says, not a hotel, says Kemi Badenoch. I beg to differ. Not only is it a hotel, it's a 4-star flipping hotel with resident healthcare while we die in corridors, says Steve. Some strong views coming in. Keep them coming. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll take more calls between now and 7 on gangs, on Jimmy Mizzen, on this drill rapper, on the NHS. We'll take all your thoughts, as many as we can get on air between now and 7, and we'll take a look at the sport next here on Talk.
We pulled a picture of New Order out to have a look, and he looks exactly like one of them. He could be in the band. One from David Loughton says, Mike, it's not New Order, it's New World Order. And then one from Brian, he says, Mike, I highly doubt that sending Starmer dressed as a NAF Spandau Ballet tribute act is going to entertain the troops in Ukraine. I've just been looking at the old New Order best of compilation. They've got a song called Regret. They've got another song called Shell Shock. And my favourite one is Thieves Like Us, which I think you could probably adhere to as well.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, now it is time for the
Sport Summary on Talk.
Sam Millard is with us. He is, of course, a Talk Sport presenter. And Sam, it's great to talk to you. How are you doing?
Peter, do you know what? Thursdays are the new Fridays, aren't they? We've got more Premier League football this evening. I'm all over the traitors. I can't wait to watch that tonight. I'm really, really good. Thank you, my friend.
Were you sad Linda went?
Do you know what? I don't want to over-exaggerate, but I don't think that's the worst thing that's going to happen to me in 2025 because she was an icon. No, seriously.
It's only the 16th.
No, but nothing can happen that's going to be worse than Linda because she was great. She was just...
I can honestly say Fawzia was my favourite.
Who was?
Fawzia. She was only there. She was only there for a short time, but she made a big impression with those incredible kind of gestures or the winks.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? I'll be honest with you. This is my first series ever watching the traitors.
What?
I know. I feel embarrassed to say it, but it really is.
Well, you've got series 1 and series 2 of the British one. You've got series 1 and series 2 of the US one. There's a New Zealand version and Australian version. I haven't seen all of those, but the American ones are brilliant. Basically, imagine Alan Cumming being there rather than Claudia Winkleman, and it being, yes, this is possible, even camper.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm imagining that. And yeah, fair enough. That is something. I can imagine you being a really good traitor because, you're quite...
How dare you?
No, but I think it's a compliment because you got to be clever, you got to be intelligent, and I think you're that.
Oh, gosh. Well, there we are. We should probably talk about the sport. I mean, I could happily talk about the traitors. Do you know, actually, there's a survey about your political leanings and what apparently Labour people are more likely to be the faithfuls and Conservatives are more likely to be the traitors. I could talk about that too. But let's talk about the Premier League because it's been a busy week. Tell us about last night's games.
Yeah, busy week, busy night last night. The main sort of game last night was the North London derby. Lots of eyes on that game, Arsenal versus Tottenham. Arsenal will be both teams going into it in kind of bad form. I mean, Tottenham had a bad season, but Arsenal had a cup defeat to Newcastle in the League Cup, an FA Cup defeat to Manchester United. Spurs took the lead early on, but Arsenal got themselves back into the game and ended up winning 2-1. So a good day for Arsenal. Also, Liverpool drew to Forest on Tuesday night. So Arsenal now, with that victory, just 4 points behind Liverpool at the top of the Premier League table. Liverpool, though, do have a game in hand. Tottenham 13th in the table. Another defeat for them. Just 1 win in 8 league games. David Moyes back at Everton. His first league game, his first game back. They lost at home to Aston Villa. Crystal Palace went to Leicester and won by 2-0. And Newcastle's incredible form continued. They beat Wolves by 3-0. Newcastle have now won their last 7 league games. They're up to 4th in the table, just 3 points behind Nottingham Forest in 3rd place. So that's what happened last night. Tonight, we finish off the midweek Premier League fixtures. Manchester United taking on Southampton and Ipswich v Brighton. They're the 2 games tonight in the Premier League.
And there was a surprise guest in Birmingham last night to see Aston Villa fans. And they did quite well out of it, didn't they?
Yeah, have you heard of the Prince of Wales?
I have heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, it was him. I mean, it was pure luck that an official engagement in Birmingham coincided with the Premier League clash.
The team that he happens to support.
Of course, we know he's a massive Aston Villa fan. So he went down to the local Wetherspoons pub for a swift pint on his way home. He surprised regulars as he strolled into the London and Northwestern pub, which is by Birmingham New Street Station. And do you know what, Peter? It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you do for a job. You cannot be a pint in a pub talking about the football, whether it's with your mates, whether it's with strangers. And you're probably thinking, yeah, you can, Sam.
No. Listen, I love a Wetherspoons.
Labour or Tories or
no. Listen,
but you can't beat it.
It's an incredibly important thing. It's a massive part of our economy. It's a massive part of people's enjoyment of life. It's something that people talk about all the time. It's real. I'm not really a sports person, as you know, but I totally get it. I totally get how important it is.
And how great was that picture there that you just showed of him in the pub, and everyone's having pictures with him, and it's great. One thing I was reading though in one of the papers, the Prince revealed that while his eldest son, Prince George 11, is also a Villa fan, he did not want all 3 of his children to support the same team.
What?
utter woke nonsense. I'm sorry. That is nonsense. It should be the complete opposite.
Why is that woke? Why is it woke?
You know what? Don't know why I said that. Sorry.
Probably because you're on this station.
Normally, it's the other way. We're like, you'll be a dad supporting.
Well, you can rebel. Yeah.
Let's say Aston Villa, and then it's your kids want to support Liverpool or Man United.
Well, I'll tell you the political version of that, right? So the founder of the Labour Party, or the first I think it was the first Labour MP, or one of them anyway, was Keir Hardie, and my friend called his 3 boys and called them Keir, Clem after Clement Attlee, who was the post-war Labour Prime Minister, and Aneurin after Aneurin Bevan, who set up the NHS, right? Keir, Clem, and Aneurin, right? Keir goes to university. What does he do? He joins the Conservative Society.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't be having that, can you?
No, that's rebellion.
You gotta, that's outrageous. But this is the opposite. This is the dad that doesn't want his.
Yeah, it's weird.
Your kids to all support the same team. Surely you want to take your kid to the game together. No, I just thought that was interesting.
No, it is interesting. All the mini Lords, when I'm sure they are with us in years to come, will all be supporting your team, which is.
I support Liverpool. Have you got a team? I know you're not. Like, is there a team you have to support?
My team is Glenavon FC in Lurgan in Northern Ireland. My dad and my brother, massive fans. I'm not really into the Premier League, but those are guys.
Have you ever been to a Premier League game before?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I went to Chelsea versus someone. I can't really remember, but it was very good.
Yeah, when you don't even know who the team is playing. That's not
I'll try to remember. It was very smooth, very swift. Much like your canter through the sport today. That's Sam Ellard there. Thank you very much to him. He is a TalkSport presenter. In a minute or two, we're going to talk to Brendan O'Neill, the chief political writer for Spiked, about what the Home Secretary has done, about what's happening in the Middle East. All of your comments, calls, texts, tweets as well. You want to get on the air? 0344 499 1000. That is the number to call. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. An absolutely packed show today. The Home Secretary has changed her mind on inquiries into grooming gangs. We'll talk about that with Brendan O'Neill from Spiked in just a second. We'll talk about the Israeli-Gaza ceasefire. Certainly Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, not happy. He says that he's being blackmailed by Hamas. Could it all fall apart? Let's hope it doesn't. The UK will never let up on Ukraine. That's what Starmer says, who's got battles on a number of fronts, including over a payout to Jerry Adams. More on that in just a second. We'll talk to Mark Francois as well, the Shadow Defence Minister, on all of these stories, and take your calls, texts and tweets as well. If you want to get in touch with me, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring for a conversation on the air, 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss before Kevin O'Sullivan at 7 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Another one of the main stories that we've been talking about has been the drill rapper, and Rob has been in touch and says, Peter, just cancel your licence if this drill rapper upsets you. It takes 5 minutes. People with integrity have already done so. However, if you choose to keep funding them, you're paying for Hugh Edwards' pension, then fine, your call, but less of the complaining, please, because you're a part of the problem. The BBC collapses overnight if the public says enough is enough. Rob, I could not do my job if I did not have the BBC, if I did not pay my licence fee. It would be impossible for me to do my job. I watch news from all sorts of channels all over the world, including the BBC. I listen to the radio from them. I listen to this station. I listen to CNN. I watch all sorts of different programmes. It's completely impractical because the BBC is so dominant. I think we are absolutely entitled to have our opinions on this, as many people do, including Mike in Colchester, who says if this rapper was sentenced to life in prison, then he should be recalled unlicensed. He should be recalled to serve out the remainder of his sentence for life, says Mike. Jamie in Ascot, 4 words, Proceeds of Crime Act. Another reason not to pay your TV licence, says this texter. Lots of people getting involved in this discussion, including on the NHS as well. These days, when you phone up a hospital to ask about a loved one, they don't ask which ward they're in, but the location of the corridor, says Graham in Bushy. And on the Middle East, which we're going to talk to Brendan O'Neill about in a second. In order to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, there will need to be huge concessions. In fact, the troubles in Northern Ireland were more or less resolved by massive concessions to terrorists, says Dawn in Chelmsford. It's interesting you should mention that. They're not exactly the same, of course, but the whole process of peace is a tough one. It's a very, very difficult one. I was talking to a friend who is in Israel at the moment in Tel Aviv about this earlier, who said, look, it's a very, very tough thing, but it is the right thing to do. We'll talk about that in a second with Brendan O'Neill, who is the chief political writer from Spike. But first, let's remind ourselves on the gangs, the grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, inquiries, what Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said in the House of Commons earlier today.
I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford Inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, speaking in the House of Commons earlier. She mentioned someone there, Tom Crowther. Now, I spoke to him on this programme last week, and he ran the Telford Inquiry. He's a KC, so a senior barrister, King's Counsel. We were talking to him about the frameworks and how it would all work. I had a fascinating discussion with him. We definitely want to try and get him on in the next few days anyway. I'm on tomorrow and Drive and then my usual weekend programmes as well. Earlier this month, he spoke to the programme, as I said, about the scandal. This is what he said in regard to Oldham specifically.
absolutely appalling that this is still going on. When my inquiry reported in 2022, I said in interviews like this, never assume it can't happen here. Don't assume it's just the pariah towns. Every town should be looking at what's going on underneath the surface. And in Telford, we had 30, 40 years of children being abused. And fundamentally, the failing was those children not being listened to, those children being dismissed, discounted, disregarded as feral or making bad life choices. That was the real problem in Telford over decades.
Tom Crowther there, the KC, who will be advising the government on these inquiries. Brendan O'Neill is the chief political writer for Spike. Brendan, do you see this as a U-turn by Yvette Cooper? Is it the right thing? Is it actually going to solve this or help in any way? And isn't Baroness Louise Casey a bit busy with the social care inquiry?
Yeah, I'm not sure Baroness Casey is the right choice for various reasons. She is very busy. But I do think it's a U-turn. I think it's a U-turn. I think it's a welcome U-turn. I think it proves that when pressure is put on the government, sometimes they have to act. They have no choice. And I think more broadly, it really calls into question the ability of the political class and the media class to set the agenda like they used to. I think that's really what has been called into question by this whole resurgence of the rape gang scandal. You know, because in the past, they would have just policed this debate by saying, well, don't be too Islamophobic, don't be too racist, don't ask too many questions. And that did have quite an impact on our ability to talk about it in public. But that doesn't wash anymore. It's simply not working. And people are pushing back and saying, look, we just want the truth about what happened to these working class girls in towns around England. So the inability of that kind of opinion forming set to set the agenda, to make the running, to control what the rest of us think and say, that is falling apart. And I think that's quite welcome.
Do you think they get that? Do you think the ruling class gets that and understands? Look, it's taken them 16 days to actually respond to this and to do some version of what various people were calling for, including in Oldham, but also doesn't say a lot about social media and people like Elon Musk that, I mean, this to me, I think there are parallels. I wonder if you agree, and feel free to disagree, Brendan, but I think there are possibly parallels with the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office drama last year, when you had, you know, great journalism from Private Eye, great journalism from Computer Weekly about it for a decade. Basically, government didn't take a blind bit of notice of it. Then suddenly it becomes a thing that people are talking about, including on social media. Suddenly this call by Oldham Council for 6 years, councillors there calling for this. We spoke to one of them earlier in the programme. Suddenly it becomes a thing because Elon Musk says it's a thing, and the government, as you say, forced to act.
That's right. I think that is a good comparison. And you're right. You know, the mainstream media did actually cover this story. I think people tend to forget that it was the Times of London, you know, our newspaper.
Andrew Norfolk, great journalist.
Yeah, brilliant journalist. And he was like a dog with a bone with this story for many, many years. And he did excellent work and he brought it into the sunlight. And we all could see the truth if we were reading those papers and following those reports. But you're right. You know, the thing that exploded it again was Elon Musk's intervention and his pushing of this story. Now, some of his interventions have been cat-handed. He hasn't always got it right. He's got some factual things wrong. And I think he's been way too harsh on Nigel Farage. That's my personal view.
Was the tone wrong in what he said about Jess Phillips?
I think the tone was wrong in relation to that. I think there were authoritarian elements to what he was saying when he was saying that ministers should be locked up and King Charles should dissolve Parliament. I mean, it was hard to know how much he was just taking the mick or how much he was being serious, but not everything he said was on point or accurate or even good. However, there is no question that his intervention has pushed this back into the limelight and has forced the government's hand. And I think it's quite sad, actually, that it takes a foreign billionaire to make our government take action. I wish they'd listen to the journalists who pursued this story. I wish they'd listened to ordinary people up and down the country who have been calling for the truth and calling for answers. The fact that they didn't listen to us and it took this incredibly wealthy, powerful man to make them listen, that doesn't say very much about them.
Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch now. In her first keynote speech of 2025, really first big speech as Conservative leader, she set out to us what her leadership will actually look like. Let's take a bit of a look and listen to this.
It may not feel like it right now, but our country's best days are ahead of us. Britain is a land of opportunity not a country to apologise for. So if you want real plans rather than announcements, join us. And if you want a better country for our children, join us. Together, we can fix the damage that Labour is inflicting. Together, we can make politics work again for the first time in a generation. The Conservative Party is changing. We are under new leadership. We are back in the service of the British people, and we are going to give you your country back.
That's Kemi Badenoch speaking to a think tank called Onward. She also gave her thoughts on uncontrolled immigration.
And no ifs, no buts. We simply cannot take all the millions of people who want to come here from elsewhere. Our country is our home. It is not a hotel. If people arriving don't want to integrate into British culture, they shouldn't be here.
So that is Kemi Badenoch speaking earlier today. Brendan, what sort of a start do you think Kemi Badenoch has made? And will these comments carry water and convince people to vote Conservative?
I think she's had a bit of a rocky start. I think that's not entirely her fault. You know, she's leading, let's not forget, she's leading a pretty divided party. You know, the Tory party has not magically come together behind Kemi Badenoch. They are still quite divided into different camps. You know, there are the kind of wets and the dries and all those things, hangovers from the past and the divisions over Brexit and so on. So she's had a rocky start for that reason. I also think she's not quite got her tone right all the time. She sometimes sounds a little bit flat, not particularly inspiring. However, I do think she's probably the best thing to happen to the Tory party in quite some years. She has got a lot of self-belief. She's got a lot of good ideas. I think the fact that she's willing to be pro-Britain, I know that sounds like a very basic requirement for someone in politics, but you'd be amazed.
Doesn't always happen. Doesn't always happen.
Exactly.
We should be proud of our country and stop apologising for our past. That is now a radical idea.
That's right, absolutely. It's now quite fashionable to be a Britain basher and to think that our history is just one crime after another and we should all be atoning for the sins of history. The fact that she's come out saying, look, let's take pride in this country, I think that's a good thing. I also think she will connect with people on the immigration issue. Now, I don't accept this idea that Britain is full of xenophobes who want to completely stop immigration forever. However, they are concerned about the porousness of our borders, the fact that we seem to have no control over who's coming here, the fact that the numbers keep going up despite politicians' promises to bring them down. People are very worried about what immigration says about our ability to police our own borders, to control our own democracy, to integrate or not to integrate. So the fact that she's going to make a policy point of that, I think that will connect with members of the public if she does it right.
We have a new statement from the BBC. This is particularly in regard to the drill music of 10, the artist, I use the term very loosely, Jake Farry, who is a convicted murderer. We asked the BBC if they had carried out any disciplinary action against staff who had made a decision to play his music. I know you're familiar with this story as well, Brendan. Let me just give the BBC their due. A BBC spokesperson said, we're not allowed to know whether it's a man or a woman, maybe they don't know either. A BBC spokesperson said, this individual does not feature on any BBC playlist. We have never played, as we pointed out to The Sun, the lyrics they have printed. He had 2 other tracks played twice. One extra has no further plans to play his music. We were not aware of his background, and we in no way condone his actions. Bit of a Google maybe on the drill rappers. I mean, given that drill is all about murder and death and destruction and stabbing people, maybe a quick Google might have been an idea, Brendan.
You know, the BBC has been pretty quick in the past to ban songs it doesn't like. You know, they banned Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Your older listeners will remember that. They banned God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols back in the 1970s. I think they even refused to say that it got to number 1. So
they banned Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire. Don't forget that in the 1960s about nuclear war. Great song.
That's right. And, so they're not shy about clamping down on things that they think will be offensive or possibly even quite dangerous. And yet when it comes to the drill issue, the BBC and others seem to have a much more relaxed approach, even though it is a very nihilistic form of music. It is a form of music that does actually celebrate drug taking, drug selling, gangs and murder and so on. Now, I'm a free speech fundamentalist. I support the right of all musicians and artists, and you're right, we use that term loosely in relation to some drill acts, but I do support the right of all people to express themselves culturally. But whether the British Broadcasting Corporation, which we are all compelled by law to fund, whether they should be playing this kind of music is a different question.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. On 10, on the artist 10, I'm giving the BBC 0 out of 10. Thank you. That's Brendan O'Neill there, who is Chief Political Writer for Spike. Thank you also to Steve, who says, it's absolutely disgusts me having to pay my TV licence as the only thing I ever watch live is talkTV. It's infuriating to me when you say the good old Auntie Beeb are playing that Killer's songs, not drill but drivel. Absolutely correct, Steve. Couldn't have put it better myself. We're going to talk to Mark Francois, the Shadow Defence Minister, in just a minute. We'll see what he makes of all this. Stay with us here on Talk.
Poking at Jimmy, who punches were exchanged. The boys fell into this cake display. At that point, Fari's arrogance couldn't sort of let this go, so he grabbed a hot glass dish of sausages and hurled it at Jimmy. Tragically, it hit him in the neck and impacted, fragmented, and Jimmy, it severed his main arteries and he bled to death. Yeah. And it was a senseless, pointless murder. Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Max in Warwickshire, who says, "Hi Peter, the BBC goes from one disaster to another. Surely it's time for them to get off air. What a horrible person who put a murdering drill rapper on air." That is Max in Warwickshire there. And the BBC spokesperson, again, we're not allowed to know whether it's a man or woman, said, "This individual does not feature on any BBC playlist. We have never played, as we pointed out to The Sun, the lyrics they have printed." Yeah, but it's other lyrics that he's done, and you could have known what they were simply by Googling this artist. They did zero research and just played it and said, "We like the music." And in fact, the DJs on air and the producer on air said they liked the music and had heard various bits of it and had heard a lot of the music, actually. Well, presumably they were aware of the kind of lyrics that this scumbag had. Anyway, to read out the rest of what the BBC says, he's had 2 other tracks played twice. One extra has no further plans to play his music. We were not aware of his background, and we in no way condone his actions. How can you not be aware of the person's background? If you're going to play a new artist, surely you do basic research if you're playing the music of someone, especially if it is this controversial. We'll talk about all the big stories today with Mark Francois, MP. He's the Shadow Defence Minister for the Conservatives. Mark, we'll talk about the Middle East in a second, but this row with the BBC, this drill rapper who has been played, this convicted murderer whose music has been played out in the BBC, what on earth are they playing at, Mark?
Well, you'd have to ask them, and by the sound of it, you already have. I just sometimes think the BBC should remember they are funded by what is in effect a national poll tax. People have to pay the licence fee, even if they watch very little or nothing of the BBC, and that gives the BBC a particular responsibility. And as someone who had, many rows with BBC interviewers over Brexit, I just would like to think that the BBC would be mindful of their duty of impartiality to the licence fee payer, because I'm not sure they always abide by that.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very fair point from Mark Francois. Thank you. On the points that we've asked you actually specifically to come on and talk about, Yvette Cooper, do you see this as a U-turn on the inquiries? Do you think these inquiries are actually going to get to the bottom of what happens? I mean, if they've got £1 million for an inquiry, is not an awful lot.
Yes, Peter. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted me to come on and talk about Ukraine.
We can talk about Ukraine. Just give us your quick thoughts on the inquiries, and then we'll go straight to Ukraine and the Middle East.
Well, I think Labour have got themselves in a terrible, terrible internal mess over all of this, and I think what the Home Secretary was doing today was trying to row back from their previous position. I don't think they maintained the confidence of the public on this, and I think that was apparent today.
OK, let's talk about Ukraine and the Middle East, and obviously both in your brief as a Shadow Defence Minister, Mark. Yeah. The Prime Minister has been there in Ukraine today, says we're standing shoulder to shoulder and will continue to. Obviously, things may change dramatically in 4 days when there is a new President of the United States. How do you see give us your evaluation of what Keir Starmer has done today versus what you think will happen in the next few days and perhaps weeks and months to come? We've had President Trump, soon to be president again, saying that he can solve Ukraine in 24 hours. He's changed that to say a few months. Clearly, this will be a major, major focus both of his administration and here in the UK as well in terms of getting it sorted out, getting some sort of deal done.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that the Prime Minister's been to Ukraine. I mean, I went about a year ago. I went to Odessa with the Defence Committee, which I served on at that time. It's good that Sir Keir Starmer is there. We have to support the Ukrainians. And by the way, I've been wearing this badge for 2 years. I didn't put it on tonight because I was coming on to do your show. They are fighting for us. They are fighting against Russian aggression. They are fighting for the right of independence and sovereignty. And if we don't stop Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, or don't help the Ukrainians stop them, we'll have to stop him in the Baltic states. And if we don't stop him there, we'll have to stop him in Poland. And by then you're into something which begins to look like World War III. So it's absolutely right that there's bipartisan support in the House of Commons between us and the Labour Party for Ukraine. If it's Chagos, we part company immediately. But on something like Ukraine, both we and the government do agree that Zelensky and the Ukrainians must be robustly supported. And it's not all going Putin's way. The Russians have had about 500,000 casualties so far, killed and wounded. It's slowly bankrupting the Russian economy. They've lost a lot of their oil and gas sales to the West because of sanctions. Their interest rates are at above 20%. And since then, countries like Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, having seen the threat. So, as Ben Wallace once said, Putin will end up with more NATO rather than less NATO.
And actually, on that note, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that the UK could be part of some sort of peacekeeping force in Ukraine or in a demilitarized zone or something like that. I'm just paraphrasing, but he said the UK could be part of a peacekeeping force. Is that a good use of resources? Is that a good use of British soldiers, especially when so many senior military officers, past and present, say that our military is actually very stretched?
Well, it would depend, Peter. I mean, I know you understand these things, but it would depend on exactly what the mission is and exactly what the task is. And I'll give you a better answer to that question when we know precisely what it is that's proposed. I think the risk in this situation is that if we were just to freeze the conflict where it were along the current front line, Putin would say something like, I've got the Crimea, I've kept most of the Donbass and the industrial resources there, and I've stopped Ukraine joining NATO, I've won. We cannot allow Putin a victory because he'd wait a few years and then have a crack at someone else. So whatever comes out of these negotiations, it cannot be anything that allows Putin to cry victory. Because
how rapidly do you think Donald Trump will get into this? I mean, he previously said 24 hours. He's now said a few weeks or months or whatever. I mean, do you see in a short space of time there being some sort of deal done in regard to Ukraine, especially when you have the might and power of the office of the President of the United States behind it?
Even with Trump, I'd be surprised if it was sorted in 24 hours, Peter.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's certainly a determination among Trump and his. Sorry, we've got bells ringing.
Have you got to go and vote, Mark? Or
No, we're through that.
Okay.
So, but I think he will want to bring this to an early conclusion if he can, and he's a robust negotiator.
Yeah.
And if he puts pressure on Putin, that is probably a good thing. But you've got to remember, Putin is a man who said some years ago that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He's trying, in effect, to rebuild a Russian empire by other means. You have to understand what this man wants. So I'm sure Trump will be robust, but we can't do anything that looks like a Russian victory.
What is your view on certainly various good reports coming out of the Middle East, coming out of Washington, London, elsewhere, about a ceasefire, hopefully being ratified, hopefully happening on Sunday, although Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, worried that Hamas are in effect blackmailing him. Those are his words. I just wonder whether you think a peace will happen and will peace hold?
I very much hope so. I was in the House of Commons earlier today for the Foreign Secretary's statement when he outlined the essence of the plan, which is a gradual release of hostages in over three phases. And the ceasefire would come into effect on Sunday if the Israeli cabinet ratify it tomorrow. But as you intimated, there seem to be suggestions that Hamas, having agreed the deal, are now trying to push at the last moment for the release of some additional Hamas prisoners. Now, after what happened with the attack, the appalling attack the previous October, there is no love lost between Israel and Hamas. So you can imagine the Israeli reaction if, having come to an agreement, Hamas try and change it. But let's hope they can get through this. Let's hope the ceasefire is ratified by both sides, as it were. It comes into effect on Sunday, and then we can begin to move on from there.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That's Mark Francois there, MP for the Conservatives and Shadow Defence Minister. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000. Martin has been in touch and says the darkness spreading across our country, it comes from a lack of trust in our government, our politicians, our police, our social services. Without a reliable government we can trust, it's just anarchy. John Cooper from Hartford says if problems with the NHS are partly due to social care, can't those that require social care, can't they be put into hotels? I would rather that than they be used by illegal immigrants, says John. Ernie says, hi Peter, why don't the emergency departments of all hospitals employ a doctor just to assess the people in A&E waiting rooms, not to treat anyone, just to reassure people that they'll be fine if they have to wait to see a GP or tell them to stay and wait or see a chemist. At the moment people are waiting for someone to be treated before they can even be seen, and most don't need to be there, they just need reassurance from a doctor. Well, certainly the triage system is meant to do that. It's meant to say, look, the people who need to be seen, you know, if blood is gushing out of your arm, you'll be seen immediately, whereas if you've you know, twisted your ankle or something, you're probably going to be waiting there for a very, very long period of time. But there just aren't enough GPs and aren't enough A&E doctors anyway. Mick says, if Starmer gets involved in the Adams controversy, does he have a conflict of interest due to the involvement of his law chambers? Well, he hasn't been at those law chambers for a while, but I think, Mick, the point that is more opposite is actually in regard to Lord Herner, Richard Herner, who is the Attorney General of this country. You may not have heard of him, but he's a close friend of Keir Starmer, and he's a KC, a senior barrister. And the point is that Lord Herner, Richard Herner, used to be Gerry Adams's barrister, used to be his lawyer. And now he was refusing to answer questions about whether he would actually get any money if Gerry Adams, who has always denied being a member of the IRA, we believe you, Jerry, I should say, gets any compensation out of this. Well, would Richard Herner be of material benefit to that? Would he get any of the cash being the lawyer? So I think there are a lot of questions around this. I think there are a lot of questions over the Legacy Act. I worked on it when I was in government in the Northern Ireland office. They did a very, very different version of it now. And we have a situation where what the Conservative government passed would give immunity to various terrorists and indeed to soldiers. It's a really, really tricky issue, but I personally do not want a single penny of my taxpayers' money going to Gerry Adams, who is morally flawed, deep failure of a human being who may deny being in the IRA, but anybody knows that that's complete nonsense. Ben in Plymouth says, hi Peter, it's a hard choice from talkTV, but you're my favourite. Why aren't you involved in government? I used to be, Ben. There's a book about it. But Ben, thank you. It's a really nice comment. Tristan in Bedford says, this absolutely disgusting card relating to all this drill music, this rapper, it needs to be broadcast loud and clear. Nothing but a card. This scumbag stabbed an innocent boy with a knife. The murderer is nothing but cowardly scum. That needs to be called out. BBC is nothing but compliant, is an advocate for stabbing, utterly deluded and disgusting. Well, I've read out the BBC statement there, I'm not going to do it again. Thank you to Derek as well. He says, hi Peter, all NHS management men and women should be given basic nursing training and when there's a crisis drafted in on the wards. Brittany says, first Greg Wallace, now this rapper. I can definitely see more issues down the road for the BBC regarding this drill music rapper. Like, seriously, have the BBC even had the decency to even think about the victim and their family? Well, we've asked the BBC, have you apologised to Jimmy Mizzen's family? Have you apologised for putting music by this murderer on air? Have you apologised? Answer came there, none. If they give us an answer in the next 26 minutes, we will tell you what it is. But it's just so straightforward. It's so stupid. Why don't you put your hands up and say, we made a mistake, won't happen again, we're terribly sorry, these people have been disciplined, maybe they've lost their jobs, they haven't, personally I think they should, you know, it's a shambles. Barry says, Russia hasn't proven itself particularly skilled in invading Ukraine. Indeed, it's been thoroughly humiliated. Why should we be worried that they will invade the Baltic states and further advance into Poland, says Barry. Well, we'll get plenty of your calls, texts and tweets. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about all these issues. We'll talk about the drill rapper. We'll talk about gangs. We'll talk about Starmer, the NHS, whatever you want to talk about. Pick up the phone, 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to as many people as we can between now and Kevin O'Sullivan, who's coming up between 7 and 10 this evening. Stay with us here on Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Julia is indeed back on Monday between 10 and 1. Of course, Alex Phillips will be in that slot tomorrow between 10 and 1. I'll be here between 4 and 7 tomorrow, and on Saturday I'll be here between 10 and 12:30, 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m, and on Sunday 10 till 1. So lots to discuss. And indeed, the drill rapper the BBC has been playing, 10 is his name, his drill name, his real name is Jake Farry. And Les in Cheshire, we've had loads of response to this. We're hoping to speak to more people about it tomorrow, including asking the Mizzen family if they will come on. We'll ask Robert Jenrick if he will come on. This is really a story that is absolutely disgraceful. And the BBC has put out this sort of slightly eye-rolling statement saying this individual does not feature on any BBC playlist. We have never played, as we pointed out to The Sun, the lyrics they have printed. He's had 2 other tracks played twice. One extra, which is the radio station involved, has no further plans to play his music. We were not aware of his background, and we in no way condone his actions. But have you apologised to the family, yes or no? We still haven't got an answer for them. Les in Cheshire has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Les, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, this Jake Ferrari. Yeah, I mean, he was handed down a life sentence in March 2009, and he was released in June 2023. Now, he's had a number of years, obviously, out of prison, but given the fact, the reason, the crime that he committed, surely he should be on life licence.
He will be on licence. He will be on licence for the next number of years. In fairness to the Ministry of Justice, they have said they're looking into this. Now, I would be astonished if he can still stay out of prison as a result of this. I also think that the Proceeds of Crime Act will perhaps come into this.
Exactly. And the thing, the real thing, the BBC, right? Okay. Now, the BBC have just failed people time and time and time again, given their views on certain aspects, and all as a political person yourself, that obviously you can't get the TV licence because you do what you do. But if people get a grip on this now, they've got to start cancelling the TV licence, because it's just not acceptable that they start putting this on air and start doing all this left-wing thing.
But it's also, they're saying, I mean, the thing that really makes my jaw drop, Les, is when they say we were not aware of his background. I mean, this is drill music. This is, I mean, I worked at the Home Office for a while, and I know, drill music is glorifying murder. It is talking about the methods of stabbing, of killing people. It's talking about gang violence. That's what it does. That's why it's called drill music. That is what the genre does. Surely, anytime you're playing any drill music at all, you Google the artist, you find out, has this person actually been convicted of anything? That's just really basic stuff. That takes, in 10 seconds, they could have Googled 10 Jake Farry and found out that he'd been convicted of murder and whose murder he'd been convicted of. They could have known this if they'd done a basic Google search.
Yeah, but half the time, these people who are on YouTube and they're doing all this drill music, they're all masked up. You can't identify them to who they are, these people who do drill music. But given the fact that he's masked up anyway, and we know who he is, then therefore the Home Office should step in and say, well, this is not acceptable.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what they do, Les.
He was given a life sentence, and it was 14 years, and he served it, and it's over 3 months. So he served 14 years and 3 months. Yeah. Now, what was that 3 months all about? Was that because he was going through the parole system?
I don't know, but listen, we're going to keep asking the questions, Les, of the Ministry of Justice. We'll see if that scumbag is still allowed in the streets. And surely if he's profiting off murder, he shouldn't be allowed to do that, and he should be recalled to prison. Let's get the perspective of David, who is in Beckingham. David, I understand you have a personal story to tell here. Just take your time.
What it is, my brother got stabbed to death in 2006.
I'm so sorry to hear that, David.
I want to talk about the parents because every Christmas and birthday, my mum cries her eyes out.
Yeah.
So sorry to say that about this rapper. I feel so sorry for this woman and her parents because, like, you know, we have to go through the problem every single year.
Yeah.
Every single year, every birthday, my brother, every Christmas, every anniversary, and then when I just want to say, I just feel for these parents.
And tell me what you think about the fact that there is actually a genre of music, a very popular genre of music, which glorifies these things, that glorifies and talks and raps about the kind of things that happen to your brother, and people listen to it for entertainment.
Oh, Peter, I'm disgusted with it. They should ban the BBC. They should... I just can't believe the BBC... I just can't believe they're playing these... How they can give these people platforms.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, I just feel for the parents.
Yeah.
I know my heart believes what these parents are going through, and all the other parents and mums and dads and sons and brothers. And
well, you're going through it too, David, because it's your brother that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't black and black. It wasn't black and black. It was like, well, I won't go into that, but you know, it's.
There are lots of people from so many different backgrounds who are affected by this. David, thanks for telling us your story. I really appreciate it. Mark's in Lincolnshire. What do you think about this BBC story and the fact that they've simply said we were not aware of his background? I mean, Mark, I just think that's really basic research. It's really basic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is. I just want to say initially there as well, you know, my sympathies to the last caller there. It must be very difficult.
Thanks, Mark.
However, no, that's fine. I can't imagine what he's going through, to be honest. However, the actual thing itself, the real issue for me with the BBC with all of this, you know, is they will repeat this. This will happen again, and it will continue to happen. And that's just on the basis that they are, you know, people that work at the BBC, people the way they are, the liberal left, really.
Not all of them, Mark. I mean, I worked at the BBC back in the day, and there are quite a few. In fact, they're the best people I worked at the BBC. I hadn't a clue what their politics were, and that was the point. They were impartial all the time. They weren't,
well,
you know.
This is the thing, but there is a heavy bias as well, and you know this, Peter. And the problem is, as I say, I mean, their own racism is inherently obvious. You can't avoid it. You know, which is always displayed in the same way that any of these people do this kind of thing. And that's by lifting up people that they think are less than them, that they have to, you know, celebrate because they, you know, it's like the whole thing where they give them jobs where they don't necessarily have the qualifications to do the jobs. It's all based on race, it's all based on diversity, etc. Which just, as I say, just displays their own inherent racism.
Yeah,
because they can't seem to see the reality that when you're saying to somebody, well, you're not good enough for the job, but however, because you're black or brown or whatever it is.
Mark, it's really interesting you mentioned that, actually. I mean, I worked, this is years ago, but I worked in South Africa, and they had very, very strong what they call the positive discrimination, as if discrimination can be in any way positive, laws. And there was a very good friend of mine, mixed race woman. I say that simply because it's exactly pertinent to what we're talking about. And she got promoted. She was a really good journalist. She got promoted, got a really good job. And I said, congratulations. And she said, well, I know it's because I'm a mixed race woman. I know that's why I've got this promotion. It's nothing to do with my journalism. And it's really patronising to those people as well, I think, as if something that you're born with and can't change should be the reason you get promoted in a job. Mark, thanks for your thoughts on that. There's some breaking news, and that is that the Hollywood director David Lynch has died at the age of 78. He was best known for directing iconic works like the Dune movies, Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, brilliant film Blue Velvet, and the cult classic show Twin Peaks. A family statement posted on Facebook says, "It is with deep regret that we as family announce the passing of the man and the artist David Lynch." That is the breaking news now at 13 minutes to 7, that the Hollywood director David Lynch, creator of Twin Peaks, has died at the age of 78. He was best known for the June movies, Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks, as I mentioned, their cult sort of classic show, I think late 80s, early 90s Twin Peaks was, and Blue Velvet, which is a superb film that I have seen. Family statement: it is with deep regret that we as family announce the passing of the man and the artist David Lynch. We'll take more of your calls after the break. Stay with us here on Talk.
When was the last time you heard anything at all about your husband's cousin?
So last January, they released one of the Hamas propaganda videos where they play games, psychological games, and he was in one of those videos along with 3 other hostages that were killed. We haven't seen a body, we haven't seen any proof of life since then either, so we are going under the hopeful proviso that he is still alive.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we're reacting to that breaking news that David Lynch, the Hollywood director, has died. He was, of course, he directed one Dune movie, not the new Dune movies. Part 1 and 2 were directed by Denis Villeneuve. So thank you to the texter who pointed that out. Always happy to correct little mistakes. And Blue Velvet, I must say, is a brilliant, probably my favourite David Lynch film. Really, really brilliant film. I think Cate Blanchett is in it, who I once flirted with. Yeah, really, Google it. Tony has been in touch. He says the BBC need to hold their heads in shame. Do the BBC not do any research, especially with the words of the song regarding that evil and twisted scumbag? I thought, what will Ofcom do? My heart and thoughts go to the family of that poor young man. Great show. Thank you for that. Another person says, as a person who writes music, I very much disapprove of drill. Simply stated, it incites violence. It combines a point scoring system. The more horrendous the crime, the higher the points. So criminal gangs have been taken to a style of music way off teasing or bettering another gang via these points. Writing should be to teach, not to gain points, be able in regard to how violent you are. Thank you to Phil in Kent as well. He says, Peter, they say if you want to find the truth, Follow the money. Well, if that's true, Russia wants to form a new USSR. Why aren't the West spending more money on their defence budgets? It's almost as if they're not really worried. Well, we're giving $3 billion a year to Ukraine, so I think we probably are quite worried. Andrew has been in touch from Halifax about Gerry Adams, about this thought that he could get some money in compensation because of really a sort of administrative error that happened many years ago. He was interned without trial, and it was signed off not by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, but by a Minister of State, someone lower down the pecking order, and now he could get thousands of our money for that. I mean, it's a more complicated story than that, but those are the bare bones. Andrew, what do you make of this?
Hi, Peter. Well, I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful. But, you know, when I heard Starmer yesterday saying, well, the government would try its best efforts to stop compensation, I thought to myself, well, Starmer is a lawyer. He knows the Constitution, and the Constitution says that Parliament is sovereign. As long as they go about the correct protocols, Parliament could easily pass a notwithstanding clause saying that terrorists, former terrorists, will not be entitled to any compensation, irrespective of any rulings of the ECHR, and the courts would be compelled to go along with it. So if this monstrosity does end up with our money, then it's firmly on Starmer's shoulders.
Should say that Gerry Adams, of course, denies ever being a member of the IRA. We believe you, Gerry. Tell me, I mean, it's not just him. There are 400 other people who were suspected IRA terrorists who could well be given money as a result of this particular piece of law. Sure. I mean, overall, the legacy bill I think has failed. The UK government is repealing it. It certainly doesn't have the approval of really many people in Northern Ireland at all, to say nothing of the many victims and families of terrorism, both loyalist and Republican, elsewhere as well, in Ireland and GB, of course, as well. I just wonder, from your perspective, Andrew, what you think should happen in regard to prosecution of both former terrorists and former soldiers.
Well, I do not think that anybody that served in the service of the Crown should be getting prosecuted. If there was an amnesty for terrorists, which there was under Blair with the on-the-run letters, then it should apply both ways. But why, Peter, should we be surprised if it turns out to be to the contrary? Because ever since the Belfast Agreement, I have seen a one-way conveyor belt of endless concessions to Irish republicanism, and the British population of Northern Ireland let down time and time again, whether it's changing the name of the IUC to the imposition of the Irish Sea border after Brexit. It's always the unionists that have to give, and it's always the Republicans that take, and it's about time it stopped.
Thank you, Andrew, for that perspective. Matt is in Cheshire, and we'll talk to Kevin O'Sullivan in just a second. Pat has said the BBC were respectable but are no longer. They should be stopped from broadcasting. That is Pat saying that. I know Matt wants to talk about gangs as well. You're very welcome to the programme, Matt. What would you like to say?
Hi, good evening, Peter.
Good evening.
I rang about grooming gangs, but can I just firstly say, in my youth, there was a prominent, millions of British people listened to gangster rap, and there was the glorification of violence in that period. None of my friends or anyone I know ever picked up a weapon and walked the streets with weapons. It was purely an entertainment, a variety of entertainment. The political failings that we've seen and the parental failings and immigration have caused these problems, and it mainly started with Tony Blair and basically the retraction of discipline in schools.
I do think there is a difference between gangster rap and drill music. I think that drill music goes a lot further than any gangster rap that I have heard. Certainly, I'm not an expert in these matters, which will shock you, Matt. But really, drill is a lot more. It's really about glorifying death.
I know that, Peter, but what I was going to say is the BBC will probably be able to use a parental advisory disclaimer to be able to get out of this sort of muddle that they've got themselves in.
I know what you mean. Matt, I've got to talk to Kev in a second, but tell us your thoughts on gangs.
Yeah, what I was going to say is some of these women were given heroin. It's well known in my area that a lot of heroin dealers that are sent to prison are of Pakistani origin. I can more or less guarantee that it's a life sentence for possessing heroin or dealing heroin.
Yeah.
And this has hardly been mentioned whatsoever at all. Mm-hmm. And you can more or less guarantee that these two things are connected, and that the grooming gangs and drug dealing are sort of connected with each other.
Yeah.
The police should be looking into the people that deal drugs.
Well, it's connecting those dots, isn't it, Matt? It's making sure that all of that is properly married up together and is seen in the round. And I do worry about these. Inquiries and whether there is actually a proper overarching strategy. We're going to continue talking about it. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. Matt, thanks for your call. That was Matt in Cheshire there. On the other side of the news, Kevin O'Sullivan. Hello, sir.
Hello, Peter.
Kevin's on between 7 and 10. What's coming up?
Well, we're going to start with the migrant crisis. Another 215 illegals came across the channel yesterday. What is our Prime Minister? How is he dealing with this new development? He's gone over to Ukraine on another one of his foreign jollies for a photo op with Zelensky. Unbelievable. I think now we know why Elon Musk labelled Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, a snivelling cretin, because he's made a snivelling cretin speech today saying we must rejoin the European Union.
Change the record, Ed.
I mean, give it up,
For goodness sake, let go. It's been
silly man.
8 years. Come on.
He's like a child. He's a silly man. It's ridiculous. Talking of silly men, we'll talk about Ed Miliband's continued bid to consign us all to being poor.